Section 15 of The Lost Art of Reading by Gerald Stanley Lee. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 3, Details, The Confessions of an Unscientific Mind. 3. Reading Down Through. 1. Inside. It is always the same way. I no sooner get a good, pleasant, interesting, working idea like this reading for principles arranged and moved over and set up in my mind, then some insinuating, persistent, concrete human being comes along, works his way in to illustrate it, and spoils it. Here is Meekins, for instance. I've been thinking on the other side of my thought every time I have thought of him. I have no more sympathy than any one with a man who spends all his time going round and round in his reading and everything else, swallowing a world up in principles. Why should a good, live, sensible man, I feel like saying, go about in a world like this stowing his truths into principles where half the time he cannot get at them himself, and no one else would want to? Going about swallowing one's experience up in principles is very well so far as it goes, but it is far better to go about swallowing up one's principles into one's self. A man who has lived and read into himself for many years does not need to read very many books. He has the gist of 9 out of 10 new books that are published. He knows, or as good as knows, what is in them by taking a long, slow look at his own heart. So does everybody else. 2. On being lonely with a book. The PGS of M said that as far as he could make out, judging from the way I talked, my main ambition in the world seemed to be to write a book that would throw all publishers and libraries out of employment. "And what will your book amount to when you get it done?" he said. "If it's convincing, the way it ought to be, it will merely convince people they oughtn't to have read it." "And that's been done before," I said. "Almost any book could do it." I ventured to add that I thought people grew intelligent enough in one of my books, even in the first 2 or 3 chapters, not to read the rest of it. I said all I hoped to accomplish was to get people to treat other men's books in the same way that they treated mine. Treat everything that way. Take things for granted. Get the spirit of the thing, then go out and gloat on it. Do something with it. Live with it. Anything but this going on page after page, using the spirit of a thing all up, reading with it. Reading down through in a book seems a great deal more important to me than merely reading the book through. I expected that the PGS of M would ask me what I meant by reading down through, but he didn't. He was still at large, worrying about the world. "I have no patience with it, your idea," he broke out. "It's all in the air. It's impractical enough anyway, just as an idea, and it's all the more impractical when it's carried out. So far as I can see, at the rate you're carrying on," said the PGS of M, "what with improving the world and all with your book, there isn't going to be anything but you and your book left." "Might be worse," I said. "What one wants in a book after the first 3 or 4 chapters, or in a world either, it seems to me, is not its facts merely, nor its principles, but oneself, one's real relation of one's real self, I mean, to some real fact. If worst came to worst, and I had to be left all alone, I'd rather be alone with myself, I think, than with anybody. It's a deal better than being lonely the way we all are nowadays, with such a lot of other people crowding round that one has to be lonely with, and books and newspapers and things besides. One has to be lonely so much in civilization. There are so many things and persons that insist on one's coming over and being lonely with them. That being lonely in a perfectly plain way, all by oneself, the very thought of it seems to me, comparatively speaking, a relief. It's not what it ought to be, but it's something. I feel the same way about being lonely with a book. I find that the only way to keep from being lonely in a book, that is, to keep from being crowded on to the outside of it after the first 3 or 4 chapters, is to read the first 3 or 4 chapters all over again. Read them down through. I have to get hold of my principles in them, and then I have to work over my personal relation to them. When I make sure of that, when I make sure of my personal relation to the author and to his ideas, and there is a fairly acquainted feeling with both of us, then I can go on reading for all I am worth. or all he is worth anyway, whichever breaks down first, and no more said about it. Everything means something to everybody when one reads down through. The only way an author and reader can keep from wasting each other's time, it seems to me, at least from having spells of wasting it, is to begin by reading down through. 3. Keeping other minds off. What I really mean by reading down through in a book, I suppose, is reading down through in it to myself. I dare say this does not seem worthy. It is quite possible, too, that there is no real defense for it. I mean for being so much interested in myself in the middle of other people's books. My theory about it is that the most important thing in this world for a man's life is his being original in it. Being original consists, I take it, not in being different, but in being honest, really having something in one's own inner experience, which one has anyway, and which one knows one has, and which one has all for one's own, whether anyone else has ever had it or not. Being original consists in making over everything one sees and reads into one's self. Making over what one reads into one's self may be said to be the only way to have a really safe place for knowledge. If a man takes his knowledge and works it all over into what he is, sense and spirit, it may cost more at first, but it is more economical in the long run, because none of it can possibly be lost, and it can all be used on the place. I do not know how it is with others nowadays, but I find that this feeling of originality in an experience, in my own case, is exceedingly hard to keep. It has to be struggled for. Of course, one has a theory in a general way that one does not want an original mind if he has to get it by keeping other people's minds off, and yet there is a certain sense in which if he does not do it at certain times, have regular periods of keeping other people's minds off, he would lose for life the power of ever finding his own under them. Most men, one knows nowadays, if they were to spend all the rest of their lives peeling other men's minds off, would not get down to their own before they died. It seems to be supposed that what a mind is for, at least in civilization, is to have other men's minds on top of it. It is the same way in books. At least I find it so myself when I get to reading in a book, reading so fast I cannot stop in it. Nearly all books, especially the good ones, have a way of overtaking a man, writing his originality down. It seems to be assumed that if a man ever did get down to his own mind by accident, whether in a book or anywhere else, he would not know what to do with it. And this is not an unreasonable assumption. Even the man who gets down to his mind regularly hardly knows what to do with it part of the time. But it makes having a mind interesting. There's a kind of pleasant, lusty feeling in it, a feeling of reality and honesty that makes having a mind, even merely one's own mind, seem almost respectable. 4. Reading backwards. Sir Joshua Reynolds gives the precedence to the outside, to authority instead of originality, in the early stages of education, because when he went to Italy he met the greatest experience of his life. He found that much of his originality was wrong. If Sir Joshua Reynolds had gone to Italy earlier, he would never have been heard of except as a copyist, lecturer, or color commentator. The real value of Sir Joshua Reynolds' discourses on art is the man in spite of the lecturer. What the man stands for is be original. Get headway of personal experience, some power of self-teaching. Then when you have something to work on, organs that act and react on what is presented to them, confront your Italy, whatever it may be, and the past, and give yourself over to it. The result is paradox and power, a receptive, creative man, an obeying and commanding, but self-centered and self-poised man, world-open, subject to the whole world, and yet who has a whole world subject to him, either by turns or at will. What Sir Joshua conveys to his pupils is not his art, but his mere humility about his art, i.e., his most belated experience, his finishing touch as an artist. The result is that having accidentally received an ideal education. Having begun his education properly, with self-command, he completed his career with a kind of Reynoldsocracy, a complacent teachery, leveling down command of others. While Sir Joshua Reynolds was an artist, he became one because he did not follow his own advice. The fact that he would have followed it if he had had a chance shows what his art shows, namely, that he did not intend to be any more original than he could help. It is interesting, however, that having acquired the blemish of originality in early youth, he never could get rid of enough of it before he died, not to be tolerated among the immortals. His career is in many ways the most striking possible illustration of what can be brought to pass when a human being without genius is by accident brought up with the same principles and order of education and training that men of genius have. Education by one's self, education by others under the direction of one's self. Sir Joshua Reynolds would have been incapable of education by others under direction of himself if he had not been kept ignorant and creative and English long enough to get a good start with himself before he went down to Italy to run a race with 500 years. In his naive, almost desperate shame over the plight of being almost a genius, he overlooks this, but his fame is based upon it. He devoted his old age to trying to train young men into artists by teaching them to despise their youth in their youth, because when he was an old man, he despised his. What seems to be necessary is to strike a balance in one's reading. It's all well enough, indeed, there's nothing better than having one's originality ridden down. One wants it ridden down half the time. The trouble comes in making provision for catching up, for getting one's breath after it. I have found, for instance, that it has become absolutely necessary, so far as I am concerned, if I am to keep my little mind's start in the world, to begin the day by not reading the newspaper in the morning. Unless I can get headway, some thought or act or cry or joy of my own, something that is definitely in my own direction first, there seems to be no hope for me all day long. Most people I know would not agree to this. They like to take a swig of all space, a glance at everybody while the world goes round, before they settle down to their own little motor on it. They like to feel that the world is all right before they go ahead. So would I, but I have tried it again and again. The world is too much for me in the morning. My own little motor comes to a complete stop. I simply want to watch the big one going round and round. I cannot seem to stop somehow, begin puttering once more with my little one. If I begin at all, I have to begin at once. In my heart I feel the big one over me all the while, circling over me, blessing me, but I keep from noticing. I know no other way and drive on. The world is getting to be, has to be, to me a purely afternoon or evening affair. I have a world of my own for morning use. I hold to it, one way or the other, with a cheerful smile or like grim death, until the clock says 12 and the sun turns the corner and the book drops. It does not seem to make very much difference what kind of a world I am in or what is going on in it, so that it is all my own. And the only way I know to do is to say or read or write or use the things first in it which make it my own the most. The one thing I want in the morning is to let my soul light its own light. Appropriate some one thing, glow it through itself. When I have satisfied the hunger for making a bit of the great world over into my world, I am ready for the world as a world, streets and newspapers of it, silent and looking in it until sleep falls. It is because men lie down under it, allow themselves to be rolled over by it, that the modern newspaper, against its will, has become the great distracting machine of modern times. As I live and look about me, everywhere I find a great running to and fro of editors across the still earth. Every editor has his herd, is a kind of bellwether, has a great paper herd of flocking at his heels. Is not the world here, I say, and am I not here to look at it? Can I really see a world better by joining a Cook's excursion on it, sweeping round the earth in a column, seeing everything in a column, looking over the shoulder of a crowd? Sometimes it seems as if the whole modern reading book and paper outfit were simply a huge crunching mass machine, a machine for arranging every man's mind from the outside. Originality may be said to depend upon a balance of two things: the power of being interested in other people's minds and the power of being more interested in one's own. In its last analysis, it is the power a man's mind has of minding its own business, which even in another man's book makes the book real and absorbing to him. It is the least compliment one can pay a book. The only honest way to commune with a real man, either in a book or out of it, is to do one's own share of talking. Both the book and the man say better things when talked back to. In reading a great book, one finds it allows for this. In reading a poor one, the only way to make it worthwhile to find anything in it is to put it there. The most self-respecting course when one finds oneself in the middle of a poor book is to turn right around in it and write it oneself. As has been said by Hoffintotter in the 14th chapter of his great masterpiece, if you find that you cannot go on, gentle reader, in the reading of this book, pray read it backwards. The original man, the man who insists on keeping the power in a mind of minding its own business, is much more humble than he looks. All he feels is that his mind has been made more convenient to him than to anybody else, and that if anyone is going to use it, he must. It is not a matter of assuming that one's own mind is superior. A very poor mind, on the premises put right in with one's own body, carefully fitted to it, to one's very nerves and senses, is worth all the other minds in the world. It may be conceit to believe this, and it may be self-preservation. But in any case, keeping an interest in one's own mind is excusable. Even the humblest man must admit that the first, the most economical, the most humble, the most necessary thing for a man to do in reading in this world, if he can do it, is to keep up an interest in his own mind. 4. Reading for facts. 1. Calling the meeting to order. Reading for persons makes a man a poet or artist, makes him dramatic with his mind, puts the world's stage into him. Reading for principles makes a man a philosopher. Reading for facts makes a man... "It doesn't make a man," spoke up the mysterious person. "Oh, yes," I said. "If he reads a few of them, if he takes time to do something with them, he can make a man out of them, if he wants to, as well as anything else." The great trouble with scientific people and others who are always reading for facts is that they forget what facts are for. They use their minds as museums. They are like old Bill Spear. They take you up into their garret and point to a bushel basket full of something, and then to another bushel basket half full of some more. Then they say in deep tones and with solemn faces, "This is the largest collection of burnt matches in the world." It's what reading for facts brings a man to, generally, fact for fact's sake. He lunges along for facts wherever he goes. He cannot stop. All an outsider can do in such cases, with 9 out of 10 scientific or collecting minds, is to watch them sadly in a dull, trance-like, helpless inertia of facts, sliding on to ignorance. What seems to be most wanted in reading for facts, in a world as large as this is, some reasonable principle of economy. The great problem of reading for facts, traveling with one's mind, is the baggage problem. To have every fact that one needs and to throw away every fact that one can get along without is the secret of having a comfortable and practicable, live, happy mind in modern knowledge. A mind that gets somewhere, that gets the hearts of things. The best way to arrange this seems to be to have a sentinel in one's mind in reading. Every man finds in his intellectual life, sooner or later, that there are certain orders and kinds of facts that have a way of coming to him of their own accord and without being asked. He is half amused sometimes and half annoyed by them. He has no particular use for them. He dotes on them some, perhaps pets them a little, tells them to go away, but they keep coming back, apropos of nothing, in the way of everything, and they keep hanging about while he attends to the regular business of his brain, and say, "Why don't you do something with me?" What I would like to be permitted to do in this chapter is to say a good word for these involuntary, helpless, wistful facts that keep tagging a man's mind around. I know that I am exposing myself in standing up for them to the accusation that I have a mere irrelevant, sideways, intellectually unbusinesslike sort of a mind. I can see my championship even now being gently but firmly set one side. It's all of a piece, this pleasant, yielding way with ideas, people say. It goes with the slovenly, lazy, useless, polite state of mind always, and the general ball-bearing view of life. It seems to me that if a man has a few involuntary, instinctive facts about him, facts that fasten themselves onto his thoughts, whether he wants them there or not, facts that keep on working for him of their own accord down under the floor of his mind, passing things up, running invisible errands for him, making shortcuts for him. It seems to me that if a man has a few facts like this in him, facts that serve him like the great involuntary servants of nature, whether they are noticed or not, he ought to find it worth his while to do something in return, conduct his life with reference to them. They ought to have the main chance at him. It seems reasonable also that his reading should be conducted with reference to them. It is no mere literary prejudice, and it seems to be a truth for the scientist as well as for the poet, that the great involuntary facts in a man's life, the facts he does not select, the facts that select him, the facts that say to him, "Come thou and live with us, make a human life out of us, that men may know us," are the facts of all others which ought to have their way sooner or later in the great struggling mass meeting of his mind. I have read equally in vain the lives of the great scientists and the lives of the great artists and makers, if they are not all alike in this, that certain great facts have been yielded to, have been made the presiding officers, the organizers of their minds. In so far as they have been great, no facts have been suppressed, and all facts have been represented. But I doubt if there has ever been a life of a powerful mind yet in which a few great facts and a great man were not seen mutually attracted to each other, day and night, getting themselves made over into each other, mutually mastering the world. Certainly, if there is one token rather than another of the great scientist or poet, in distinction from the small scientist or poet, it is the courage with which he yields himself, makes his whole being sensitive and free before his instinctive facts, gives himself fearless up to them, allows them to be the organizers of his mind. It seems to be the only possible way in reading for facts that the mind of a man can come to anything, namely by always having a chairman and a few alternates appointed for life to call the meeting to order. 2. Symbolic facts. If the meeting is to accomplish anything, before it adjourns sine die, everything depends upon the gavel in it, upon there being some power in it that makes some facts sit down and others stand up, but which sees that all facts are represented. In general, the more facts a particular fact can be said to be a delegate for, the more a particular fact can be said to represent other facts, the more of the floor it should have. The more power of reading for facts depends upon a man's power to recognize symbolic or sum total or senatorial facts and keep all other facts, the general mob or common run of facts, from interrupting. The amount of knowledge a man is going to be able to master in the world depends upon the number of facts he knows how to avoid. This is where our common scientific training, the manufacturing of small scientists in the bulk, breaks down. The first thing that is done with a young man nowadays, if he is to be made into a scientist, is to take away any last vestige of power his mind may have of avoiding facts. Everyone has seen it, and yet we know perfectly well when we stop to think about it that when in the course of his being educated a man's ability to avoid facts is taken away from him, it soon ceases to make very much difference whether he is educated or not. He becomes a mere memory let loose in the universe, goes about remembering everything, hit or miss. I never see one of these memory machines going about mowing things down, remembering them, but that it gives me a kind of sad, sudden feeling of being intelligent. I cannot quite describe the feeling. I am part sorry and part glad and part ashamed of being glad. It depends upon what one thinks of, one's own narrow escape or the other man, or the way of the world. All one can do is to thank God silently in some safe place in one's thoughts that after all there is a great deal of the human race, always is, in every generation who by mere circumstance cannot be educated, bowled over by their memories. Even at the worst, only a few hundred persons can be made over into reductio ad absurdum, Stanley Hall's, that is, study science under pupils of the pupils of Stanley Hall, and the chances are even now, as bad as things are and are getting to be, that for several hundred years yet man, the big brother of creation, will insist on preserving his special distinction in it, the thing that has lifted him above the other animals, his inimitable faculty for forgetting things. 3. Duplicates, a principle of economy. I do not suppose that anybody would submit to my being admitted, I was being blackballed before I was born, to the brotherhood of scientists, and yet it seems to me that there is a certain sense in which I am as scientific as anyone. It seems to me, for instance, that it is a fairly scientific thing to do, a fairly matter-of-fact thing, to consider the actual nature of facts and to act on it. When one considers the actual nature of facts, the first thing one notices is that there are too many of them. The second thing one notices about facts is that they are not so many as they look. They are mostly duplicates. The small scientist never thinks of this because he never looks at more than one class of facts, never allows himself to fall into any general interesting fact-comparing habit. The small poet never thinks of it because he never looks at facts at all. It is thus that it has come to pass that the most ordinary human being, just living along, the man who has the habit of general information, is the intellectual superior of the mere scientists about him, or the mere poets. He is superior to the mere poet because he is interested in knowing facts, and he is superior to the minor scientist because he does not want to know all of them. Or at least, if he does, he never has time to try, and so keeps on knowing something. When one considers the actual nature of facts, it is obvious that the only possible model for a scientist of the first class, or a poet of the first class, in this world is the average man. The only way to be an extraordinary man, master of more of the universe than anyone else, is to keep out of the two great pits God has made in it, in which the educated are thrown away, the science pit and the poet pit. The area and power and value of a man's knowledge depend upon his having such a boundless interest in facts that he will avoid all facts he knows already and go on to new ones. The rapidity of a man's education depends upon his power to scent a duplicate fact afar off and to keep from stopping and puttering with it. Is not one fact out of 1,000 about a truth as good as the other 999 to enjoy it with? If there were not any more truths, or if there were not so many more things to enjoy in this world than one had time for, it would be different. It would be superficial, I admit, not to climb down into a well and collect some more of the same facts about it, or not to crawl under a stone somewhere and know what we know already. A little harder. But as it is, well, it does seem to me that when a man has collected one good representative fact about a thing, or at most two, it is about time to move on and enjoy some of the others. There is not a man living dull enough, it seems to me, to make it worth while to do any other way. There is not a man living who can afford, in a world made as this one is, to know any more facts than he can help. Are not facts plenty enough in the world? Are they not scattered everywhere? And there are not many enough to go around. Let us take our one fact apiece and be off, and be men with it. There is always one fact about everything which is the spirit of all the rest, the fact a man was intended to know and to go on his way rejoicing with. It may be superficial withal and merely spiritual, But if there is anything worthwhile in this world to me, it is not to miss any part of being a man in it than any other man has had. I do not want to know what every man knows, but I do want to get the best of what he knows and live every day with it. Oh, to take all knowledge for one's province, to have rights with all facts, to be naive and unashamed before the universe, to go forth fearlessly to know God in it, to make the round of creation before one dies, to share all that has been shared, to be all that is, to go about in space saying halloa to one's soul in it, in the stars and in the flowers and in children's faces. Is not this to have lived? That there should be nothing left out in a man's life that all the world has had? End of section 15. Section 16 of The Lost Art of Reading by Gerald Stanley Lee. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 5. Reading for Results. The Blank Paper Frame of Mind. The PGS of M read a paper in our club the other day which he called Reading for Results. It was followed by a somewhat warm discussion, in the course of which so many things were said that were not, so that the entire club, before anyone knew it, had waked up and learned something. The PGS of M took the general ground that most of the men one knows nowadays had never learned to read. They read wastefully. Our common schools and colleges, he thought, ought to teach a young man to read with a purpose. When an educated young man takes up a book, he said, he should feel that he has some business in it and attend to it. I said I thought young men nowadays read with purposes too much. Purposes were all they had to read with. When a man feels that he needs a purpose in front of him to go through a book with, when he goes about in a book looking over the edge of a purpose at everything, the chances are that he is missing 9/10 of what the book has to give. The PGS of M thought that 1/10 was enough. He didn't read a book to get 9/10 of an author. He read it to get the 1/10 he wanted, to find out which it was. I asked him which 10th of Shakespeare he wanted. He said that sometimes he wanted 1/10 and sometimes another. That is just it, I said. Everybody does. It is at the bottom and has been at the bottom of the whole Shakespeare nuisance for 300 years. Every literary man we have or have had seems to feel obliged somehow to read Shakespeare in 10ths. Generally he thinks he ought to publish his 10th, make a streak across Shakespeare with his soul, before he feels literary or satisfied or feels that he has a place in the world. One hardly knows a man who calls himself really literary, who reads Shakespeare nowadays except with a purpose, with some little sideshow of his own mind. It is true that there are still some people, not very many perhaps, but we all know some people who can be said to understand Shakespeare, who never get so low in their minds as to have to read him with a purpose, but they are not prominent. And yet there is hardly any man who would deny that at best his reading with a purpose is almost always his more anemic, official, unresourceful reading. It is like putting a small tool to a book and whittling on it, instead of putting one's whole self to it. One might as well try to read most of Shakespeare's plays with a screwdriver or with a wrench as with a purpose. There is no purpose large enough that one is likely to find to connect with them. Shakespeare himself could not have found one when he wrote them in any small or ordinary sense. The one possible purpose in producing a work of art in any age is to praise the universe with it, love something with it, talk back to life with it. And the man who attempts to read what Shakespeare writes with any smaller or less general, less overflowing purpose than Shakespeare had in writing it, should be advised to do his reading with some smaller, more carefully fitted author, one nearer to his size. Of course, if one wants to be a mere authority on Shakespeare, or a mere author, there is no denying that one can do it, and do it very well, by reading him with some purpose that is too small to have ever been thought of before. But if one wants to understand him, get the wild native flavor and power of him, he must be read in a larger, more vital and open and resourceful spirit. as a kind of spiritual adventure. Half the joy of a great man, like any other great event, is that one can well afford, at least for once, to let one's purposes go. To feel oneself lifted out, carried along, if only for a little time, into some vast stream of consciousness, to feel great spaces around one's human life, to float out into the universe, to bathe in it, to taste it with every pore of one's body and all one's soul. This is the one supreme thing that the reading of a man like William Shakespeare is for. To interrupt the stream with dams, to make it turn wheels, intellectual wheels, mostly pinwheels and theories, or any wheels whatever, is to cut oneself off from the last chance of knowing the real Shakespeare at all. A man knows Shakespeare in proportion as he gives himself, in proportion as he lets himself make a Shakespeare of him a little while. As long as he is reading in the Shakespeare universe, his one business in it is to live in it. He may do no mighty work there, pile up a commentary or throw on a footnote, but he will be a mighty work himself if he let William Shakespeare work on him some. Before he knows it, the universe that Shakespeare lived in becomes his universe. He feels the might of that universe being gathered over to him, descending upon him, being breathed into him day and night, to belong to him always. The power and effect of a book which is a real work of art seems always to consist in the way it has of giving the nature of things a chance at a man, of keeping things open to the sun and air of thought. To those who cannot help being interested, it is a sad sight to stand by with the typical modern man, especially a student, and watch him go blundering about in a great book, cooping it up with purposes. The P.G.S. of M. remarked somewhere at about this point that it seemed to him that it made a great difference who an author or reader was. He suggested that my theory of reading with a not purpose worked rather better with Shakespeare than with the Encyclopedia Britannica or the Honorable Carroll D. Wright, Commissioner of Statistics, or Ella Wheeler Wilcox. I admitted that in reading dictionaries, statistics, or mere poets, or mere scientists, it was necessary to have a purpose to fall back upon to justify one's self. And there was no denying that reading for results was a necessary and natural thing. The trouble seemed to be that very few people could be depended on to pick out the right results. Most people cannot be depended upon to pick out even the right directions in reading a great book. It has to be left to the author. It could be categorically proved that the best results in this world, either in books or in life, had never been attained by men who always insisted on doing their own steering. The special purpose of a great book is that a man can stop steering in it, that one can give oneself up to the undertow, to the cross-current in it. One feels oneself swept out into the great struggling human stream that flows under life. One comes to truths and delights at last that no man, though he had 1,000 lives, could steer to. Most of us are not clear-headed or far-sighted enough to pick out purposes or results in reading. We are always forgetting how great we are. We do not pick out results, and could not if we tried, that are big enough. 2. The usefully unfinished. The P.G.S. of M. remarked that he thought there was such a thing as having purposes in reading that were too big. It seemed to him that a man who spent nearly all his strength when he was reading a book in trying to use it to swallow a universe with must find it monotonous. He said he had tried reading a great book without any purpose whatever except its tangents or suggestions, and he claimed that when he read a great book in that way, the average great book, the monotone of innumerable possibility wore on him. He wanted to feel that a book was coming to something, and if he couldn't feel in reading it that the book was coming to something, he wanted to feel at least that he was. He did not say it in so many words, but he admitted he did not care very much in reading for what I had spoken of as a stream of consciousness. He wanted a nozzle on it. I asked him at this point how he felt in reading certain classics. I brought out quite a nice little list of them, but I couldn't track him down to a single feeling he had had to think of, all by himself, on a classic. I found he had all the proper feelings about them, and a lot of well-regulated qualifications besides. He was on his guard. Finally, I asked him if he had read, I am not going to get into trouble by naming it, a certain contemporary novel under discussion. He said he had read it. Great deal of power in it, he said, but it doesn't come to anything. I do not see any possible artistic sense, he said, in ending a novel like that. It doesn't bring one anywhere. Neither does one of Keats' poems, I said, or Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The odor of a rose doesn't come to anything, bring one anywhere. It would be hard to tell what one really gets out of the taste of roast beef. The sound of the surf on the Atlantic doesn't come to anything, but hundreds of people travel a long way and live in one-windowed rooms and rock in somebody else's bedroom rocker to hear it year after year. Millions of dollars are spent in Europe to look at pictures, but if a man can tell what it is he gets out of a picture in so many words, there is something very wrong with the picture. The PGS of M gave an impatient wave of his hand. To be strictly accurate, he gave it in the middle of the last paragraph, just before we came to the Atlantic. The rest is congressional record. And after he had given the impatient wave of his hand, he looked hurt. I accordingly drew him out. He was still brooding on that novel. He didn't approve of the heroine. What was the matter? I said. Dying in the last chapter? It is one of those novels in which the heroine takes the liberty of dying in a mere paragraph at the end, and in what always has seemed, and always will, to some people, a rather unsatisfactory and unfinished manner. The moral and spiritual issues of a book ought to be, well, things are all mixed up. She dies indefinitely. Most women do, I said. I asked him how many funerals of women, wives and mothers, he had been to in the course of his life, where he could sit down and really think that they had died to the point, the way they do in novels. I didn't see why people should be required by critics and other authorities to die to the point in a book where, more than anywhere else, it is this shallow, reckless way that readers have of wanting to have everything pleasant and appropriate when people die in novels, which makes writing a novel nowadays as much as a man's reputation is worth. The PGS of M explained that it wasn't exactly the way she died, but it was the way everything was left to the imagination. I said I was sorry for any human being who had lived in a world like this who didn't leave a good deal to the imagination when he died. The dullest, most uninteresting man that anyone can ever know becomes interesting in his death. One walks softly down the years of his life, peering through them. One cannot help loving him a little, stealthily. One goes out a little way with him on his long journey, feels bound in with him at last. Actually bound in with him, it is like a promise, forever. The more one knows about people's lives in this world, the more indefinitely, the more irrelevantly, sometimes almost comically, or as a kind of an aside, or a bit of repartee, they end them. Suddenly, sometimes, while we laugh or look, they turn upon us, fling their souls upon the invisible, and are gone. It is like a last wistful, haunting pleasantry, death is. From some of us, a kind of bravado in it, as one would say. Oh, well, dying is really, after all, having been allowed one look at a world like this, a small matter. It is true that most people in most novels never have been born, do not really need to die, that is, if they are logical, and they might as well die to the point, or as the reader likes as in any other way, but if there is one sign rather than another that a novel belongs to the first class, it is that the novelist claims all the privileges of the stage of the world in it. He refuses to write a little parlor of a book, and he sees that his people die the way they live, leaving as much left over to the imagination as they know how. That there are many reasons for the habit of reading for results, as it is called, goes without saying. It also goes without saying, that is, no one is saying very much about it. That the habit of reading for results, such as it is, has taken such a grim hold on the modern American mind that the greatest result of all in reading, the result in a book that cannot be spoken in it, or even out of it, is being unanimously missed. The fact seems to need to be emphasized that the novel which gives itself to one to be breathed and lived, the novel which leaves a man with something that he must finish himself, with something he must do and be, is the one which gets a man somewhere most of all. It is the one which ends the most definitely and practically. When a novel, instead of being hewn out, finished, and decorated by the author, added as one more monument or tomb of itself in a man's memory, becomes a growing, living daily thing to him, the wondering, unfinished events of it, and the unfinished people of it, flocking out to him, interpreting for him the still unfinished events and all the dear unfinished people that jostle in his own life. It is a great novel. It seems to need to be recalled that the one possible object of a human being's life in a novel, as out of it, is to be loved. This is definite enough. It is the novel in which the heroine looks finished that does not come to anything. I always feel a little grieved and frustrated, as if human nature had been blasphemed a little in my presence, if a novel finishes its people or thinks it can. It is a small novel which finishes love and lays it away, which makes me love, say, one brave woman or mother in a book and close her away forever. The greater novel makes me love one woman in a book in such a way that I go about through all the world seeking for her, knowing and loving 1,000 women through her. I feel the secret of their faces through her, flickering by me on the street, this intangible result. This eternal flash of a life upon a life is all that reading is for. It is practical because it is eternal and cannot be wasted, and because it is forever to the point. Life is greater than art, and art is great only insofar as it proves that life is greater than art, interprets and intensifies life, and the power to taste life, make us live wider and deeper and farther in our 70 years. 3. Athletics. The world is full, Ellery Charming used to say, of fools who get a-going and never stop. Set them off on another tack, and they are half cured. There are grave reasons to believe that, if an archangel were to come to this earth and select a profession on it, instead of taking up some splendid, serious, dignified calling, he would devote himself to a comparatively small and humble-looking career, that of jogging people's minds. This might not seem at first sight to be a sufficiently large thing for an archangel to do, but if it were to be done at all, those who have tried it think, it would take an archangel to do it. The only possible practical or businesslike substitute one can think of in modern life for an archangel would have to be an institution of some kind. Some huge, pleasant mutual association for jogging people's minds might do a little something, perhaps, but it would not be very thorough. The people who need it most, half or three-quarters of them, the treadmill conscientious, dear, rutty people of this world, would not be touched by it. What is really wanted, if anything is really to be done in that way of jogging, is a new day in the week. I've always thought that there ought to be a day, one day in the week, to do wrong in. Not very wrong, but wrong enough to answer the purpose. A perfectly irresponsible, delectable, inconsequent day, a Sabbath of whims. There ought to be a sort of Sabbath for things that never get done because they are too good or not good enough. Letters that ought to be postponed until others are written, letters to friends that never done, books that don't bear on anything, books that no one has asked one to read, calls on unexpecting people, bills that might just as well wait, tinkering around the house on the wrong things, the right ones, perfectly helpless standing by, sitting with one's feet a little too high, if possible on one's working desk, being a little foolish and liking it, making poor puns, enjoying one's bad grammar, a day, in short, in which whatever a man is, he rests from himself and plays marbles with his soul. Most people nowadays, at least the intellectual so-called, the learned above all others, are so far gone under the reading for results theory that they have become mere work worshippers in books, worshippers of work which would not need to be performed at all, most of it, by men with healthy natural or fully exercised spiritual organs. One very seldom catches a man in the act nowadays of doing any old-fashioned or important reading. The old idea of reading for athletics instead of scientifics has almost no provision made for it in the modern intellectual man's life. He does not seem to know what it is to take his rest like a gentleman. He lunges between all science and all vaudeville, and plays in this way, it is true, but he never plays with his mind. He never takes playing with a mind seriously as one of the great standard joys and powers and equipments of human life. He does not seem to love his mind enough to play with it. Above all, he does not see that playing with a mind, on great subjects at least, is the only possible way to make it work. He entirely overlooks the fact, in this little round of reading for results, that the main thing a book is in a man's hands for is the man, that it is there to lift him over into a state of being, a power of action. A man who really reads a book and reads it well, reads it for moral muscle, spiritual skill, for farsightedness, for catholicity, above all for a kind of limberness and suppleness, a swift, sure strength through his whole being. He faces the world with a new face when he has truly read a true book, and as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, he rejoices as a strong man to run a race. As between reading to heighten one's senses, one's suggestibility, power of knowing and combining facts, the multum in parvo method in reading and the parvum in multo method, a dogged, accumulating, impotent, callous reading for results, it is not hard to say which, in the equipment of the modern scientist, is being overlooked. It is doubtless true, the common saying of the man of genius in every age, that everything is grist to his mill, but it would not be if he could not grind it fine enough. And he is only able to grind it fine enough because he makes his reading bring him power as well as grist. Having provided for energy, stored up energy for grinding, he guards and preserves that energy as the most important and culminating thing in his intellectual life. He insists on making provision for it. He makes ready solitude for it, blankness, reverie, sleep, silence. He cultivates the general habit not only of rejecting things, but of keeping out of their way when necessary, so as not to have to reject them. And he knows the passion in all times and all places for grinding grist finer instead of gathering more grist. These are going to be the traits of all the mighty reading, the reading that achieves in the 20th century. The saying of the man of genius that everything is grist to his mill merely means that he reads a book athletically, with a magnificent play of power across it, with an heroic imagination or power of putting together. He turns everything that comes to him over into its place and force and meaning in everything else. He reads slowly and organically where others read with their eyes. He knows what it is to tingle with a book, to blush and turn pale with it, to read his feet cold. He reads all over with his nerves and senses, with his mind and heart. He reads through the whole tract of his digestive and assimilative nature. To borrow the Hebrew figure, he reads with his bowels. Instead of reading to maintain a theory or a row of facts, he reads to sustain a certain state of being. The man who has the knack, as some people seem to think it, of making everything he reads and sees beautiful or vigorous and practical does not need to try to do it. He does it because he has a habit of putting himself in a certain state of being and cannot help doing it. He does not need to spend a great deal of time in reading for results. He produces his own results. The less athletic reader, the smaller poet or scientist, confines himself to reading for results, for ready-made beauty and ready-made facts, because he is not in condition to do anything else. The greater poet or scientist is an energy, a transfigurer, a transmuter of everything into beauty and truth. Everything having passed through the heat and light of his own being is fused and seen where it belongs, where God placed it when he made it, in some relation to everything else. I fear that I may have come, in bearing down on this point, to another of the of course places in this book. It is not just to assume that because people are not living with a truth that they need to be told it. It is of little use when a man has used his truth all up boring people with it to try to get them, what is left of the truth and the people, to do anything about it. But if I may be allowed one page more, I would like to say in the present epidemic of educating for results just what a practical education may be said to be. The indications are that the more a man spends, makes himself able to spend a large part of his time, as Whitman did, in standing still and looking around and loving things, the more practical he is. Even if a man's life were to serve as a mere guide-board to the universe, it would supply to all who know him the main thing that the universe seems to be without. But a man who, like Walt Whitman, is more than a guide-board to the universe, who deliberately takes time to live in the whole of it, who becomes a part of the universe to all who live always, who makes the universe human to us, companionable, such a man may not be able to fix a latch on a kitchen door. But I can only say for one that if there is a man who can lift a universe bodily and set it down in my front yard where I can feel it, helping me do my work all day and guarding my sleep at night, that man is practical. Who can say he does not come to anything? To have heard it rumored that such a man has lived, can live, is a result, the most practical result of all to most of the workers of the world. A bare fact about such a man is a gospel. Why work for nothing, that is, with no result, in a universe where you can play for nothing and by playing earn everything? Such a man is not only practical, serving those who know him by merely being, but he serves all men always. They will not let him go. He becomes a part of the structure of the world. The generations keep flocking to him the way they flock to the great sane, silent ministries of the sky and of the earth. Their being drawn to them is their being drawn to him. The strength of clouds is in him, and the spirit of falling water, and he knoweth the way of the wind. When a man can be said by the way he lives his life to have made himself the companion of his unborn brothers and of God, when he can be said to have made himself not a mere scientist, but a younger brother, a real companion of air, water, fire, mist, and of the great gentle ground beneath his feet, he has secured a result. 6. Reading for feelings. 1. The passion of truth. Reading resolves itself sooner or later into two elements in the reader's mind. 1. Tables of facts. A. Rows of raw fact. B. Principles, spiritual or sum total facts. 2. Feelings about the facts. But the man with the scientific method, who lives just around the corner from me, tells me that reading for feelings is quite out of the question for a scientific mind. It is foreign to the nature of knowledge to want knowledge for the feelings that go with it. Feelings get in the way. I find it impossible not to admit that there is a certain force in this, but I notice that when the average small scientist, the man around the corner, for instance, says to me what he is always saying, "Science requires the elimination of feelings," says it to me in his usual chilled-through, Ophidian, infallible way, I never believe it, or at least I believe it very softly and do not let him know it. But when a large scientist, a man like Charles Darwin, makes a statement like this, I believe it as hard, I notice, as if I had made it all up myself. The statement that science requires the elimination of the feelings is true or not true, it seems to me, according to the size of the feelings. Considering what most men's feelings are, a man like Darwin feels that they had better be eliminated. If a man's feelings are small feelings, they are in the way in science, as a matter of course. If he has large, noble ones, feelings that match the things that God has made, feelings that are free and daring, beautiful enough to belong with things that a God has made, he will have no trouble with them. It is the feelings in a great scientist which have always fired him into being a man of genius in his science, instead of a mere tool or scoop or human dredge of truth. All the great scientists show this firing process down underneath in their work. The idea that it is necessary for a scientific man to give up his human ideal, that it is necessary for him to be officially brutal in his relation to nature, to become a professional nobody in order to get at truth, to make himself over into matter in order to understand matter, has not had a single great scientific achievement or conception to its credit. All great insight or genius in science is a passion of itself, a passion of worshiping real things. Science is a passion not only in its origin, but in its motive power and in its end. The real truth seems to be that the scientist of the greater source is great, not by having no emotions, but by having disinterested emotions, by being large enough to have emotions on both sides, and all sides, all held in subjection to the final emotion of truth. Having a disinterested, fair attitude in truth is not a matter of having no passions, but of having passions enough to go around. The temporary idea that a scientist cannot be scientific and emotional at once is based upon the experience of men who have never had emotions enough. Men whose emotions are slow and weak, who have one-sided or wavering emotions, find them inconvenient as a matter of course. The men who, like Charles Darwin or some larger Browning, have the passion of disinterestedness are those who are fitted to lead the human race, who are going to lead it along the paths of space and the footsteps of the worlds into the great presence. The greatest astronomer or chemist is the man who glows with the joy of wrestling with God, of putting strength to strength. To the geologist who goes groping about in stones, his whole life is a kind of mind-reading of the ground, a passion for getting underneath, for communing flesh to flesh with a planet. What he feels when he breaks a bit of rock is the whole round earth, the wonder of it, the great cinder floating through space. He would all but risk his life or sell his soul for a bit of lava. He is studying the phrenology of a star. All the other stars watch him. The feeling of being in a kind of eternal, invisible, infinite enterprise, of carrying out a world, of tracking a God, takes possession of him. He may not admit there is a God in so many words, but his geology admits it. He devotes his whole life to appreciating a God, and the God takes the deed for the word, appreciates his appreciation, whether he does or not. If he says that he does not believe in a God, he merely means that he does not believe in Calvin's God, or in the present dapper, familiar little God, or the hero of the sermon last Sunday. All he means by not believing in a God is that his God has not been represented yet. In the meantime, he and his geology go sternly, implacably on for thousands of years, while churches come and go. So does his God. His geology is his own ineradicable worship. His religion, his passion for the all, for communing through the part with the whole, is merely called by the name of geology. Insofar as a man's geology is real to him, if he is after anything but a degree in it, or a thesis or a salary, his geology is an infinite passion taking possession of him, soul and body, carrying him along with it, sweeping him out with it into the great workroom, the flame and the glow of the world shop of God. It would not seem necessary to say it if it were not so stoutly denied. But living as we do, most of us, with a great flock of little scientists around us, pecking on the infinite, most of them, each with his own little private strut or blasphemy, bragging of a world without a God, it does seem as if we were going to be the great strategic event of the 20th century for all men, to get the sciences and the humanities together once more, if only in our own thoughts, to make ourselves believe as we must believe, after all, that it is humanity in a scientist, and not a kind of professional inhumanity in him, which makes him a scientist in the great sense, a seer of matter. The great scientist is a man who communes with matter, not around his human spirit, but through it. The small scientist, violating nature inside himself to understand it outside himself, misses the point. At all events, if a man who has locked himself out of his own soul goes around the world and cannot find gods in it, he does not prove anything. The man who finds a God proves quite as much, and he has his God besides. 2. Topical point of view. If it is true that reading resolves itself sooner or later into two elements in the reader's mind, tables of facts and feelings about the facts, that is, rows of raw fact and spiritualized or related facts, several things follow. The most important of them is one's definition of education. The man who can get the greatest amount of feeling out of the smallest number and the greatest variety of facts is the greatest and most educated man, comes nearest to living an infinite life. The purpose of education in books would seem to be to make every man as near to this great or semi-infinite man as he can be made. If men were capable of becoming infinite by sitting in a library long enough, the education problem would soon take care of itself. There is no front or side door to the infinite. It is all doors, and if the mere taking time enough would do it, one could read one's way into the infinite as easily as if it were anything else. One can hardly miss it. One could begin anywhere. There would be nothing to do but to proceed at once to read all the facts and have all the feelings about the facts and enjoy them forever. The main difficulty one comes to in being infinite is that there is not time. But inasmuch as great men or semi-infinite men have all had to contend with this same difficulty quite as much as the rest of us, it would seem that in getting as many of the infinite facts and having as many infinite feelings about the facts as they do, great men must employ some principle of economy or selection that common, that is, artificial men are apt to overlook. There seem to be two main principles of economy open to great men and to all of us in the acquiring of knowledge. One of these, as has been suggested, may be called the scientist's principle of economy, and the other the poet's or artist's. The main difference between the scientific and the artistic method of selection seems to be that the scientist does his selecting all at once and when he selects his career, and the artist makes selecting the entire business of every moment of his life. The scientist of the average sort begins by partitioning the universe off into topics. Having selected his topic and walled himself in with it, he develops it by walling the rest of the universe out. The poet, who is almost always a specialist, also a special kind of poet, having selected his specialty, develops it by letting all the universe in. He spends his time in making his life a cross-section of the universe. The spirit of the whole of it, something of everything in it, is represented in everything he does. Whatever his specialty may be in poetry, painting, or literature, he produces an eternal result by massing the infinite and eternal into the result. He succeeds by bringing the universe to a point, by accumulating out of all things himself. It is the tendency of the scientist to produce results by dividing the universe and by subdividing himself. Unless he is a very great scientist, he accepts it as the logic of his method that he should do this. His individual results are small results, and he makes himself professedly small to get them. All questions with regard to the reading habit narrow themselves down at last. Is the book to be divided for the man, or is the man to be divided for the book? Shall a man so read as to lose his soul in a subject, or shall he so read that the subject loses itself in him, becomes a part of him? The main fact about our present education is that it is the man who is getting lost. And not only is every man getting lost to himself, but all men are eagerly engaged in getting lost to each other. The dead level of intelligence, being a dead level in a literal sense, is a spiritless level, a mere grading down and grading up of appearances. In all that pertains to real knowledge of the things that people appear to know, greater heights and depths of difference in human lives are revealed today than in almost any age of the world. What with our steam engines, machines for our hands and feet, and our sciences, machines for our souls, we have arrived at such an extraordinary division of labor, both of body and mind, that people of the same classes are farther apart than they used to be in different classes. Lawyers, for instance, are as different from one another as they used to be from ministers and doctors. Every new skill we come to, and every new subdivision of skill, marks the world off into pigeonholes of existence, into huge, hopeless, separate divisions of humanity. We live in different elements, monsters of the sea wondering at the air monsters peering curiously down into the sea, sailors on the surfaces, trollers over other people's worlds. We commune with each other with lines and hooks. Some of us on the rim of the earth spend all our days quarreling over bits of the crust of it. Some of us burrow and live in the ground and are as workers in mines. The sound of our voices to one another is as though they were not. They are as the sound of picks groping in rocks. The reason that we are not able to produce or even to read a great literature is that a great book can never be written, in spirit at least, except to a whole human race. The final question with regard to every book that comes to a publisher today is, what mine shall it be written in? Which public shall it burrow for? A book that belongs to a whole human race, which cannot be classified or damned into smallness, would only be left by itself on the top of the ground in the sunlight. The next great book that comes will have to take a long trip, a kind of drummer's route around life, from mind to mind, and now in one place and now another, be let down through the shafts to us. There is no whole human race. A book with even 40-man power in it goes begging for readers. The reader with more than 1, 2, or 3-man power of reading scarcely exists. We shall know our great book when it comes by the fact that crowds of kinds of men will flock to the paragraphs in it, each kind to its own kind of paragraph. It will hardly be said to reach us, the book with 40-man power in it, until it has been broken up into 40ths of itself. When it has been written over again, broken off into 40 books by 40 men, none of them on speaking terms with each other, it shall be recognized in some dim way that it must have been a great book. It is the first law of culture, in the highest sense, that it always begins and ends with the fact that a man is a man. Teaching the fact to a man that he can be a greater man is the shortest and most practical way of teaching him other facts. It is only by being a greater man, by raising his state of being to the nth power, that he can be made to see the other facts. The main attribute of the education of the future, insofar as it obtains today, is that it strikes both ways. It strikes in and makes a man mean something, and having made the man, the main fact means something. It strikes out through the man and makes all other facts mean something. It makes new facts and old facts as good as new. It makes new worlds. All attempts to make a whole world without a single whole man anywhere to begin one out of are vain attempts. We are going to have great men again sometime, but the science that attempts to build a civilization in this 20th century by subdividing such men as we already have mocks at itself. The devil is not a specialist, and he never will be. He is merely getting everybody else to be, as fast as he can. It is safe to say, in this present hour of subdivided men and sub-selected careers, that any young man who shall deliberately set out at the beginning of his life to be interested, at any expense and at all hazards, in everything, in 20 or 30 years will have the field entirely to himself. It is true that he will have to run what every more vital man has had to run, the supreme risk, the risk of being either a fool or a seer, a fool if he scatters himself into everything, a seer if he masses everything into himself. But when he succeeds at last, he will find that for all practical purposes, as things are going today, he will have a monopoly of the universe, of the greatest force there is in it. The combining and melting and fusing force that brings all men and all ideas together, making the race one, a force which is the chief characteristic of every great period and of every great character that history has known. It is obvious that whatever may be its dangers, the topical or scientific point of view in knowledge is one that the human race is not going to get along without, if the house is to continue to have men in it. The question remains, the topical point of view and the artistic point of view both being necessary, how shall a man contrive in the present crowding of the world to read with both? Is there any principle in reading that fuses them both? And if there is, what is it? End of section 16. Section 17 of The Lost Art of Reading by Gerald Stanley Lee. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 7. Reading the World Together. 1. Focusing. There are only a few square inches of cells and things, no one quite knows what, on a human face, but a man can see more of the world in those few inches and understand more of the meaning of the world in them, put the world together better there, than in any other few inches that God has made. Even 1 or 2 faces do it for a man, for most of us, when we have seen them through and through. Not a face anywhere. No one has ever seen one that was not a mirror of a whole world, a poor and twisted one perhaps, but a great one. The man that goes with it may not know it, may not have much to do with it. While he is waiting to die, God writes on him. But however it is, every man's face, I cannot help feeling it when I really look at it, is helplessly great. It is one man's portrait of the universe as he has found it, his portrait of a whole. I have caught myself looking at crowds of faces as if they were rows of worlds. Is not everything I can know or guess or cry or sing written on faces? An audience is a kind of universe by itself. I could pray to one, when once the soul is hushed before it. If there were any necessity to select one place rather than another, any particular place to address a God in, I think I would choose an audience. Praying for it instead of to it is a mere matter of form. I cannot find a face in it that does not lead to a God, that does not gather a God in for me out of all space, that is not one of his assembling places. Many and many a time, when heads were being bowed, when I have caught a face in a congregation and prayed to it and with it, every man's face is kind of a prayer he carries around with him. One can hardly help joining in. It is sacrament to look at a face, if only to take sides in it, join with the God's self in it, and help against the others. Whoever or whatever he is up there across all heaven, he is a God to me because he can be infinitely small or infinitely great as he likes. I will not have a God that can be shut up into any horizon or shut out of any face. When I have stood before audiences, have really realized faces, felt the still and awful thronging of them through my soul, it has seemed to me as if some great miracle were happening. It's as if, but who shall say it? Have you never stood, gentle reader, alone at night on the frail rim of the earth? Spread your heart out wide upon the dark and let it lie there. Let it be flocked on by stars. It is like that when something is lifted and one sees faces. Faces are worlds to me. However hard I try, I cannot get a man somehow any smaller than a world. He is a world to himself, and God helping me, when I deal with him, he shall be a world to me. The dignity of a world rests upon him. His face is a sum total of the universe. It is made by the passing of the infinite through his body. It is the mark of all things that are upon his flesh. What I like to believe is that there is an organic principle of unity like this in a human face. If there is some way of summing up a universe in a man's face, there must be some way of summing it up, of putting it together in his education. It is this summing a universe up for oneself and putting it together for oneself and for oneself which makes an education in a universe worthwhile. In other words, With a symbol as convenient, as near to him as his own face, a man need not go far in seeking for a principle of unity in focusing education. A man's face makes it seem not unreasonable to claim that the principle of unity in all education is the man, that the single human soul is created to be its own dome of all knowledge. A man's education may be said to be properly laid out in proportion as it is laid out the way he lays out his countenance. The method or process by which a man's countenance is laid out is a kind of daily organic process of world swallowing. What a man undertakes in living is the making over of all phenomena, outer sights and sounds, into his own inner ones, the passing of all outside knowledge through himself. In proportion as he is being educated, he is making all things that are into his own flesh and spirit. When one looks at it in this way, it is not too much to say that every man is a world. He makes the tiny platform of his soul in infinite space a stage for worlds to come to play their parts on. His soul is a little all-show, a kind of dainty pantomime of the universe. It seemed that I stood and watched a world awake, the great night still upbearing me above the flood of the day. I watched it strangely as a changed being, the godlikeness and the might of sleep, the spell of the all upon me. I became as one who saw the earth as it is, in a high noon of its real self, hung in its mist of worlds, wrapped in its own breath. I saw it. A queer little ball of cooled-off fire, it seemed, still and swift, plunging through space. And when I looked close in my heart, I saw cunning little men on it, nations and things running around on it. And when I looked still nearer, looked at the lighted side of it, I saw that each little man was not what I thought, a dot or fleck on the universe, and I saw that he was a reflection, a serious, wondrous miniature of all the rest. It all seemed strange to me at first, to a man who lives, as I do, in a rather weary, laborious, painstaking age, that this should be so. As I looked at the little man, I wondered if it really could be so. Then as I looked, the great light flowed all around the little man, and the little man reflected the great light. But he did not seem to know it. I felt like calling out to him, to one of them, telling him out loud to himself, wrapped away as he was in his haste and dumbness, not knowing, and in the funny little noise of cities in the great still light. And so while the godlikeness and the might of sleep was upon me, I watched him, longed for him, wanted him for myself. I thought of my great cold, stretched out wisdom, how empty and bare it was, this staring at stars one by one, this taking notes on creation, this slow, painful tour of space, when after all, right down there, in this little man, I said, is not all I can know or hope to know stowed away and written up? And when I thought of this, the blur of sleep still upon me, I could hardly help reaching down for him, half patronizing him, half worshipping him, taking him up to myself, where I could keep him by me, keep him to consult, watch for the sun, face the infinite. Dear little fellow, I said, my own queer little fellow, my own little cosmos, pocket size. I thought how convenient it would be if I could take one in my hand, do my seeing through it, focus my universe through it, and when the strange mood left me and I came to, I remembered, or thought I remembered, that I was one of those myself. Why not be your own little cosmos glass? I said. I have been trying it now for some time. It is hard to regulate the focus, of course, and it is not always what it ought to be. It has to be allowed for some. I do not claim much for it, but it's better, such as it is, than a sheer bit of nothing, I think, to look at a universe with. The human unit. It matters little that the worlds that are made in this way are very different in detail or emphasis, that some of them are much smaller and more twisted than others. The great point, so far as education is concerned, is for all teachers to realize that every man is a whole world. that it is possible and natural for every man to be a whole world. His very body is, and there must be some way for him to have a whole world in his mind. A being who finds a way of living a world into his face can find a way of reading a world together. If a man is going to have unity, read his world together, possess all-in-oneness in knowledge, he will have to have it the way he has it in his face. It is superficial to assume, as scientists are apt to do, that in a world where there are infinite things to know, a man's knowledge must have unity, or can have unity, in and of itself. The moment that all the different knowledges of a man are passed over or allowed to be passed over into his personal qualities, into the muscles and traits and organs and natural expressions of the man, they have unity and force and order and meaning as a matter of course. Infinite opposites of knowledge, recluses and separates of knowledge, are gathered and can be seen gathered every day in almost any man, in the glance of his eye, in the turn of his lip, or in the blow of his fist. It is not the method of science as science, and it is not in any sense put forward as the proper method for a man to use in his mere specialty, but it does seem to be true that if a man wants to know things which he does not intend to know all of, the best and most scientific way for him to know such things is to reach out to them and know them through their human or personal relations. I can only speak for myself, but I have found for one that the easiest and most thorough practical way for me to get the benefit of things I do not know is to know a man who does. If he is an educated man, a man who really knows, who has made what he knows over into himself, I find if I know him that I get it all, the gist of it. The spirit of his knowledge, its attitude toward life, is all in the man, and if I really know the man, absorb his nature, drink deep at his soul, I know what he knows, it seems to me, and what I know besides. It is true that I cannot express it precisely. He would have to give the lecture or diagram of it, but I know it, know what it comes to in life, his life and my life. I can be seen going around living with it afterwards any day. His knowledge is summed up in him, his whole world is read together in him, belongs to him, and he belongs to me. To know a man is to know what he knows in its best form, the things that have made the man possible. A great portrait painter, it has always seemed to me, is a kind of god in his way, knows everything his sitters know. He knows what every man's knowledge has done with the man, the best part of it, and makes it speak. I have never yet found myself looking at great walls of faces, one painter's faces, found myself walking up and down in Sargent's soul without thinking what a great inhabited, trooped through man he was, all knowledges flocking to him, showing their faces to him from the ends of the earth, emptying their secrets silently to his brush. If a man like Sargent has for one of his sitters a great astronomer, an astronomer who is really great, who knows and absorbs stars, Sargent absorbs the man, and as a last result the stars in the man, and the man in Sargent, and the man's stars in Sargent all look out of the canvas. It is the spirit that sums up and unifies knowledge. It is a fact to be reckoned with in education that knowledge can be summed up, and that the best summing up of it is a human face. 3. The higher cannibalism. It is not unnatural to claim, therefore, that the most immediate and important shortcut in knowledge that the comprehensive or educated man can take comes to him through his human and personal relations. There is no better way of getting at the spirits of facts, of tracing out valuable and practical laws of generalizations, than the habit of trying things on to people in one's mind. I have always thought that if I ever got discouraged and had to be an editor, I would do this more practically. As it is, I merely do it with books. I find no more satisfactory way of reading most books, the way one has to through their backs, than reading the few books that one does read, through persons and for persons and with persons. It is a great waste of time to read a book alone. One needs room for rows of one's friends in a book. One book read through the eyes of 10 people has more reading matter in it than 10 books read in a common, lazy, lonesome fashion. One likes to do it not only because one finds oneself enjoying a book 10 times over, getting 10 people's worth out of it, but because it makes a kind of sitting room of one's mind, puts a fireplace in it, and one watches the 10 people enjoying one another. It may be for better, and it may be for worse, but I have come to the point where, if I really care about a book, the last thing I want to do with it is to sit down in a chair and read it by myself. If I were ever to get so low in my mind as to try to give advice to a real live author, any author but a dead one, it would be, let there be room for all of us, O author, in your book. If I am to read a live, happy, human book, give me a bench. I have noticed that getting at truth on most subjects is a dramatic process rather than an argumentative one. One gets at truth either in a book or in a conversation, not so much by logic as by having different people speak. If what is wanted is a really comprehensive view of a subject, 2 or 3 rather different men placed in a row and talking about it, saying what they think about it in a perfectly plain way, without argument, will do more for it than 200 or 300 syllogisms. A man seems to be the natural or wild form of the syllogism, which this world has tacitly agreed to adopt. Even when he is a very poor one, he works better with most people than the other kind. If a man takes a few other men, very different ones, uses them as glasses to see a truth through, it will make him as wise in a few minutes with that truth as a whole human race. Knowledge which comes to a man with any particular sweep or scope is, in the very nature of things, dramatic. I fear, gentle reader, I am nearing a conviction. I feel a certain constraint coming over me. I always do when I am nearing a conviction. I never can be sure how my soul will take it upon itself to act when I am making the attempt I am making now, to state what is to me an intense personal belief in a general, convincing, or impersonal way. The embarrassing part of a conviction is that it is so. And when a man attempts to state a thing as it is, to speak for God or everybody, well, it would not be respectable not to be embarrassed a little. Speaking for God. I know perfectly well, sitting here at my desk this minute with this conviction up in my pen, that it is merely a little thing of my own, that I ought to go on from this point cool and straight with it. But it is a conviction, and if you find me, gentle reader, in the very next page swiveling off and speaking for God, I can only beg that both he and you will forgive me. I solemnly assure you herewith that, however it may look, I am merely speaking for myself. I have thought of having a rubber stamp for this book, a stamp with "It seems to me" on it. A good many of these pages need going over with it afterwards. I do not suppose there is a man living, either I or any other dogmatist, who would not enjoy more speaking for himself, if anybody would notice it, than speaking for God. I have a hope that if I can only hold myself to it on this subject, I shall do much better in speaking for myself, and may speak accidentally for God besides. I leave it for others to say, but it is hard not to point a little in a few places. But here is the conviction. As I was going to say, knowledge which comes to a man with any particular sweep or scope is in the very nature of things dramatic. If the minds of 2 men expressing opinions in the dark could be flashed on a canvas, if there could be such a thing as a composite photograph of an opinion, a biograph of it, it would prove to be, with 9 men out of 10, a dissolving view of faces. The unspoken sides of thought are all dramatic. The palest generalization a man can express, if it could be first stretched out into its origins, and then in its origins could be crowded up and focused, would be found to be a long unconscious procession of human beings, a murmur of countless voices, all our knowledge is conceived at first, taken up and organized in actual men, flashed through the delights of souls and the music of voices upon our brains. If it is true, even in the business of the street, that the greatest efficiency is reached by dealers who mix with the knowledge of their subject a keen appreciation and mastery of men, it is still more true of the business of the mind that the greatest, most natural and comprehensive results are reached through the dramatic or human insights. All our knowledge is dead drama. Wisdom is always some old play faded out, blurred into abstractions. A principle is a wonderful, disguised biograph. The power of Carlyle's French Revolution is that it is a great spiritual play, a series of pictures and faces. It was the French Revolution all happening over again to Carlyle, and it was another French Revolution to every one of his readers. It was dynamic, an induced current from Paris via Craigenputtock, because it was dramatic, great abstractions, playing magnificently over great concretes. Every man in Carlyle's history is a philosophy, and every abstraction in it a man's face, a beckoning to us. He always seems to me a kind of colossus of a man stalking across the dark, way out in the past, using men as searchlights. He could not help doing his thinking in persons, and everything he touches is terribly and beautifully alive. It was because he saw things in persons, that is, in great, rapid, organized sum totals of experience and feeling, that he was able to make so much of so little as a historian, and what is quite as important, at least in history, so little of so much. The true criticism of Carlyle as a historian is not a criticism of his method, that he went about in events and eras doing his seeing and thinking with persons, but that there were certain sorts of persons that Carlyle, with his mere lighted-up brute imagination, could never see with. They were opaque to him. Every time he lifted one of them up to see 10 years with, or a bevy of events, or whatever it might be, he merely made blots or sputters with them on his page. But it was his method that made it a great page, wider and deeper and more splendid than any of the others, and the blots were always obvious blots, did no harm there, no historical harm. Almost anyone could see them, and if they could not, were there not always plenty of little chilled-through historians pattering around after him, tracking them out? But the great point of Carlyle's method was that he kept his perspective with it, never flattened out like other historians, by tables of statistics, unbewildered by the blur of nobodies. He was able to have a live, glorious giant's way of writing, a godlike method of handling great handfuls of events in one hand, of unrolling great stretches of history with a look, of seeing things and making things seen in huge, broad, focused, vivid human wholes. It was a historical method of treating great masses, which Thomas Carlyle and Shakespeare and Homer and the Old Testament all have in common. The fact that it fails in the letter, and with hordes of literal persons, that it has great gaps of temperament left over in it, is of lesser weight. The letter passes by, thank heaven, in the great girths of time and space. In all lasting or real history, only the spirit has a right to live. Temperaments in histories, even at the worst, are easily allowed for, filled out with temperaments of other historians. That is, they ought to be, and are going to be, if we ever have real historians any more, historians great enough and alive enough to have temperaments, and with temperaments great enough to write history the way God does, that can be read. History can only be truly written by men who have concepts of history, and every concept, says Hegel, must be universal, concrete, and particular, or else it cannot be a concept. That is, it must be dramatic. And what is true of a great natural man or man of genius like Carlyle is equally true of all other natural persons, whether men of genius or not. A stenographic report of all the thoughts of almost any man's brain for a day would prove to almost any scientist how spiritually organized personally conducted a human being's brain is bound to be, almost in spite of itself, even when it has been educated, artificially numbed, and philosophized. A man may not know the look of the inside of his mind well enough to formulate or recognize it, but nearly every man's thinking is done as a matter of course, either in people, or to people, or for people, or out of people. It is the way he grows, the way the world is woven through his being, the way of having life more abundantly. It is not at all an exaggeration to say that if Shakespeare had not created his characters, they would have created him. One need not wonder so very much that Shakespeare grew so masterfully in his later plays and as the years went on. Such a troop of people as flocked through Shakespeare's soul would have made a Shakespeare, allowing more time for it, out of almost anybody. The essential wonder of Shakespeare, the greatness which has made men try to make a dozen specialists out of him, is not so very wonderful when one considers that he was a dramatist. A dramatist cannot help growing great. At least he has the outfit for it if he wants to. One hardly wants to be caught giving a world recipe, a prescription for being a great man, but it does look sometimes as if the habit of reading for persons, of being a sort of spiritual cannibal or man-eater, of going about through all the world absorbing personalities the way other men absorb facts, would gradually store up personality in a man and make him great, almost inconveniently great at times, and in spite of himself. The probabilities seem to be that it was because Shakespeare instinctively picked out persons in the general scheme of knowledge more than facts. It was because persons seemed to him on the whole in every age to be the main facts the age was for, summed the most facts up. It was because they made him see the most facts, helped him to feel and act on facts, made facts experiences to him, that William Shakespeare became so supreme and masterful with facts and men both. To learn how to be pro tem, all kinds of men, about all things, to enjoy their joys in the things, is the greatest and the livest way of learning things. To learn to be a committee of the temperaments all by oneself, which is what Shakespeare did, is at once the method and the end of education, outside of one's specialty. There could be no better method of doing this, no method open to everybody, than the method, outside of one's specialty, of reading for persons and with persons. It makes all one's life a series of spiritual revelations. It is like having regular habits of being born again, of having new experiences at will. It mobilizes all love and passion and delight in the world, and sends it flowing past one's door. In this day of immeasurable exercises, why does not someone put in a word for the good old-fashioned exercise of being born again? It is an exercise which few men seem to believe in, not even once in a lifetime. But it is easily the best all-around drill for living, and even for reading, that can be arranged. And it is not a very difficult exercise if one knows how, does it regularly enough. It is not at all necessary to go off to another world to believe in reincarnations if one practices on them every day. Women have always seemed to be more generally in the way of being born again than men, but they have less scope, and sometimes there is a certain feverish smallness about it, and when men once get started, like Robert Browning, in distinction from Mrs. Browning, they make the method of being born again seem a great triumphant one. They seem to have a larger repertoire to be born to, and they go through it more rapidly and justly. At the same time, it is true that nearly all women are more or less familiar with the exercise of being born again, living pro tem and at will in others, and only a few men do it, merely the greatest ones, statesmen, diplomats, editors, poets, great financiers, and other prophets, all men who live by seeing more than others have time for. They are found to do their seeing rather easily on the whole. They do it by the perfectly normal exercise of being born into other men, looking out of their eyes a minute whenever they like. All great power in its first stage is essentially dramatic. A man-judging, man-illuminating power, the power of guessing what other people are going to think and do. When the world points out to the young man, as it is very fond of doing, that he must learn from experience, what it really means is that he must learn from his dramatic drill in human life, his contact with real persons, his slow, compulsory, scrupulous going the rounds of his heart, putting himself in the place of real persons. Probably every man who lives in proportion as he covets power or knowledge would like to be, at will at least, a kind of focus to everybody. It is true that in his earlier stages, and in his lesser moods afterward, he would probably seem to most people a somewhat teetering person, diffused, chaotic, or contradictory. It could hardly be helped, with the raw materials of a great man all scattered around in him, great unaccounted-for insights, idle-looking powers, all as yet unfused. But a man in the long run, and longer the better, is always worth while, no matter how he looks in the making, and it certainly does seem reasonable, however bad it may look, that this is the way he is made, that in proportion as he does his knowing spiritually and powerfully, he will have to do it dramatically. It sometimes seems as if knowing, in the best sense, were a kind of rotary person process, a being everybody in a row, a state of living symposium. The interpenetrating, blending in, digesting period comes in due course, the time of settling down into himself, and behold, the man is made, a unified, concentrated individual, universal man, a focus to everybody. This is not quite being a god, perhaps, but it is as near to it, on the whole, as a man can conveniently get. End of section 17. Section 18 of The Lost Art of Reading by Gerald Stanley Lee. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. 4. Spiritual thrift. But perhaps one of the most interesting things about doing up one's knowing in persons is that it is not only the most alive, but the most economical knowledge that can be obtained. On the whole, 11 or 12 people do very well to know the world with, if one can get a complete set, if they are different enough and one knows them down through. The rest of the people that one sees about, from the point of view of stretching one's comprehension, one's essential sympathy or knowledge, do not count very much. They are duplicates, to be respected and to be loved, of course, but to be kept in the cellar of actual consciousness. There is no other way to do. Everybody was not intended to be used by everybody. It is because we think that they were, mostly, that we have to come to our present, modern, heartlessly cordial fashion of knowing people by parlorfuls, whole parlorfuls at a time. Is thy servant a whale? Said my not unsociable soul to me. Is one to be fed with one's kind as if they were animalculae? As if they had to be taken in the bulk, if one were really to get something? It is heartless and shallow enough. Who is not weary of it? No one knows anybody nowadays. He merely knows everybody. He falls before the reception room. A reception room is a place where we set people up in rows like pickets on a fence to know them. Then, like the small boy with a stick, one tap per picket, we run along knowing people. No one comes in touch with anyone. It is getting so that there is hardly any possible way left in our modern life for knowing people except by marrying them. One cannot even be sure of that when one thinks how married people are being driven about by books and by other people. Society is a crowd of crowds, mutually destroying each other, and literature is a crowd of books, all shutting each other up. And the law seems to be either selection or annihilation, whether in reading or living. The only way to love everybody in this world seems to be to pick out a few in it, delegates of everybody, and use these few to read with, and to love and understand the world with, and to keep close to it all one's days. The higher form of one's facts are put in this world the fewer one needs. To know 12 extremely different souls utterly, to be able to borrow them at will, turn them on all knowledge, bring them to bear at a moment's notice on anything one likes, is to be an educated, masterful man in the most literal possible sense. Except in mere matters of physical fact, things which are small enough to be put in encyclopedias and looked up there, a man with 12 deeply loved or deeply pitied souls woven into the texture of his being can flash down into almost any knowledge that he needs, or go out around almost any ignorance that is in his way through all the earth. The shortest way for an immortal soul to read a book is to know and absorb enough other immortal souls and get them to help. Any system of education which is like our present prevailing one is so vulgar or unpsychological as to overlook the soul as the organ and method of knowledge, which fails to see that the knowledge of human souls is itself the method of acquiring all other knowledge and of combining and utilizing it, makes narrow and trivial and impotent scholars as a matter of course. Knowledge of human nature and of oneself is the nervous system of knowledge, the flash and culmination, the final thoroughness of all the knowledge that is worth knowing and of all ways of knowing it. It is all a theory, I suppose. I cannot prove anything with it. I dare say it is true that neither I nor anyone else can get, by reading in this way what I like to think I am getting, slowly a cross-section of the universe. But it is something to get, as time goes on, a cross-section of all the human life that is being lived in it. It is something to take each knowledge that comes, strike all the keys of one's friends on it, clear the keyboard of space on it. When one really does this, nothing can happen to one which does not or cannot happen to one in the way one likes. Events and topics in this world are determined to a large degree by circumstances, dandelions, stars, politics, Bob Whites, acids, Kant, and domestic science. But personalities, a man's means of seeing things, are determined only by the limits of his imagination. One's knowledge of pictures, or of Kant, of Bob Whites, or acids, cannot be applied to every conceivable occasion, but nothing can happen in all the world that one cannot see or feel or delight in or suffer in through Charles Lamb's soul, if one has really acquired it. One can be a Charles Lamb almost anywhere toward almost anything that happens along, or a Robert Burns, or a Socrates, or a Heine, or an Emile, or a Dickens, or Hugo, or anyone, or one can hush one's soul one eternal moment and be the Son of God. To know a few men, to turn them into one's books, to turn them into one another, into oneself, to study history with their hearts, to know all men that live with them, to put them all together and guess at God with them. It seems to me that knowledge that is as convenient and penetrating, as easily turned on and off, as much like a light as this, is well worth having. It would be like taking away a whole world if it were taken away from me. The little row of people I do my reading with, and some of them are supposed to be dead hundreds of years. But the dramatic principle in education strikes both ways. While it is true that one does not need a very large outfit of people to do one's knowing with, if one has the habit of thinking in persons, it is still more true that one does not need a large outfit of books. As I sit in my library, facing the fire, I fancy I hear sometimes my books eating each other up. One by one, through the years they have disappeared from me. Only portraits or titles are left. The more beautiful book absorbs the less, and the greater folds itself around the small. I seldom take down a book that was an enthusiasm once without discovering that the heart of it has fled away, has stealthily moved over, while I dreamed, to some other book. Lowell and Whittier are footnotes scattered about in several volumes now. J.G. Holland, Sainte-Beuve of my youth, is digested by Matthew Arnold, and Matthew Arnold by Walter Pater, and Walter Pater by Walt Whitman. Montaigne and Plato have moved over into Emerson, and Emerson has been distilled slowly into 40 years. Holmes has dissolved into Charles Lamb and Thomas Brown. A big volume of Rossetti, whom I oddly knew first, is lost in a little volume of Keats. And as I sit and wait, Ruskin and Carlyle are going fast into a battered copy on my desk of the Old Testament. Once let the dramatic principle get well started in a man's knowledge, and it seems to keep on sending him up new currents the way his heart does, whether he notices it or not. If a man will leave his books and his people to themselves, if he will let them do with him and with one another what they want to do, they all work while he sleeps. If the spirit of knowledge, the dramatic principle in it, is left free, knowledge all but comes to a man of itself, cannot help coming, like the dew on the grass. With enough reading for persons, one need not buy very many books. One allows for unconscious cerebration in books. Books not only have a way of being read through their backs, but of reading one another. 5. The city, the church, and the college. The greatest event of the 19th century was that, somewhere in it, at some immense and hidden moment in it, human knowledge passed silently over from the emphasis of persons to the emphasis of things. I have walked up and down Broadway when the whole street was like a prayer to me, miles of it, a long dull cry to its little strip of heaven. I have been on the Elevated, the huge shuttle of the great city, hour by hour, had my soul woven into New York on it, back and forth, up and down, until it was hardly a soul at all, a mere ganglion, a quivering, pressed-in nerve of second-story windows, skies of clotheslines, pale faces, mist and rumble and dust. Perhaps I have a soul, I say. Perhaps I have not. Has anyone a soul? When I look at the men, I say to myself, now I will look at the women. And when I look at the women, I say, now I will look at the men. Then I look at shoes. Men are cheap in New York. Every little man I see stewing along the street, when I look into his face in my long, slow country way, as if a hill belonged with him or a scrape of sky or something, or as if he really counted, looks at me as one would say, I am a millionth of New York, and you? I am not even that. The city gathers itself together in a great roar about me, puts its hands to its mouth and bellows in my country ears. Men are cheap enough, dear boy, didn't you know that? See those dots on Brooklyn Bridge? I go on with my walk. I stop and look up at the great blocks. Who are you? The great blocks say. I take another step. I am one more shuffle on the street. Men are cheap. Look at us. 1,000 show windows say, are there not square miles of human countenance drifting up Broadway any day? And where are they going? I asked my soul. To oblivion? They are going from things, said my soul, to things. And sotto voce, from one set of things they know they do not want, to another set of things they do not know they do not want. One need not wonder very long that nearly every man who one knows in New York is at best a mere cheered-up and plucky pessimist. Of course, one has to go down and see one's favorite New Yorker. One needs to and wants to, and one needs to get wrought in with him, too. But when one gets home, who is there who does not have to get free from his favorite New Yorker, shake himself off from him, save his soul a little longer? Men are cheap, it keeps saying over and over to one. A New York soul does. It keeps coming back, whispering through all the aisles of thought. New York spreads itself like a vast concrete philosophy over every man's spirit. It reeks with cheapness, human cheapness. How could it be otherwise with a New York man? I never come home from New York, wander through the city with my heart afterward, look down upon it, see Broadway with this little man on it, fretting up and down between his 20-story blocks, in his little trough of din under the wide heaven, loomed at by iron and glass, browbeaten by stone, smothered by smoke, but that he all but seems to me, this little Broadway man, to be slipping off the planet, to barely belong to the planet. I feel like clutching at him, helping him to hold on, pitying him. Then I remember how it really is, if there is any pitying to be done, this crowded off, matter cringing, callous-looking man pities me. When I was coming home from New York the last time, had reached a safe distance behind my engine out in the fields, I found myself listening all over again to the roar saved up in me of the great city. I tried to make it out, tried to analyze what it was that the voice of the great city said to me. The voice of the city is the voice of things, my soul said to me. And the man? I said, where does the man come in? Are not the things for the man? Then the roar of the great city rose up about me like a flood, swallowed my senses in itself, numbed and overbore me, swooned my soul in itself and said, no, the things are not for the man is for the things. This is what the great city said. And while I still listened, the roar broke over me once more with its no, 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 its million voices in it, its million souls in it, all doubts and fears and hates and cries, all deadnesses flowed around me, took possession of me. Then I remembered the iron and wood faces of the men, great processions of them I had seen there, the strange, protected-looking, boxed-in faces of the women, faces in crates I had seen, and I understood New York, I said, is a huge war, a great battle numbered off in streets and houses, every man against every man a shut-in, self-defended man. It is a huge, lamp-lighted, sun-lighted, ceaseless struggle day unto day. But New York is not the world. Try the whole world, said my soul to me. Perhaps you can do better. Are there not churches, men-making, men-gathering places, oases for strength and rest in it? Then I went to all the churches in the land at once of a still Sabbath morning, steeples in the fields and hills and steeples in cities, the sound of splendid organs praying for the poor emptied people, the long, still innumerable sound of countless collections being taken, the drone and seesaw of sermons, countless sermons. Ah, these poor helpless Sundays! Paper philosophy and axioms, chimes of bells to call the people to paper philosophy and axioms. Canst thou not, said I to my soul, guide me to a man, to a door that leads to a man, a world-lover or prophet? Then I fled. I always do after a course of churches. To the hills from whence cometh strength. David tried to believe this. I do sometimes, but hills are great, still, coldly companionable, rather heartless fellows. I know in my heart that all the hills on earth, with all their halos on them, their cities of leaves and circles of life, would not take the place to me in mystery, closeness, illimitableness, and wonder of one man. And when I turn from the world of affairs and churches to the world of scholarship, I cannot say that I find relief. Even scholarship itself, is under a stone, most of it, prone and pale, and like all the rest, under the emphasis of things. Scholarship is getting to be a mere huge New York, infinite rows and streets of things, taught by rows of men who have made themselves over into things, to another row of men who are trying to make themselves over into things. I visit one after the other of our great colleges with forlorn, lonesome little chapels, cozy corners for God and for the humanities, their vast thing libraries, men like dots in them, their great long reached-out laboratories, stables for truth, and I am obliged to confess in spirit that even the colleges, in all ages the strongholds of the human past and the human future, the citadels of manhood, are getting to be great man-blind centers, shambles of souls, places for turning every man out from himself, every man away from other men, making a thing of him, or at best a Columbus for a new kind of fly or valet to a worm or tag or label on matter. When one considers that it is a literal, scientific, demonstrable fact that there is not a single evil that can be named in modern life, social, religious, political, or industrial, which is not based on the narrowness and blindness of classes of men toward one another, It is very hard to sit by and watch the modern college almost everywhere, with its silent, deadly thing emphasis upon it, educating every man it can reach into not knowing other men, into not knowing even himself. 6. The outsiders. One cannot but look with deep pleasure at first, with much relief upon these healthy, objective, modern men of ours. The only way out for spiritual hardihood after the world-sick Middle Ages was a Columbus, a vast, splendid train of things after him, of men who emphasized things, who could emphasize things. It is a great spectacle and a memorable one, the one we are in today, the spectacle of the wonder that men are doing with things. But when one begins to see that it is all being turned around, that it is really a spectacle of what things are doing with men, one wakes with a start. One wonders if there could be such a thing as having all the personalities of a whole generation lost. One looks suspiciously and wistfully at the children one sees in the schools. One wonders if they are going to be allowed, like their fathers and mothers, to have personalities to lose. I have all but caught myself kidnapping children as I have watched them flocking in the street. I have wanted to scurry them off to the country, a few of them, almost anywhere, for a few years. I have thought I would try to find a college to hide them in, some back county protected college, a college which still has the emphasis of things upon it. Then I would wait and see what would come out of it. I would at least have a little bevy of great men, perhaps, saved out for a generation, enough to keep the world supplied with samples, to keep up the bare idea of the great man, a kind of isthmus to the future. The test of civilization is what it produces, its man, if only because it produces all else. If we have all made up our minds to allow the specialist to set the pace for us, either to be specialists ourselves or vulgarly to compete with specialists for the right of living or getting a living, there is going to be a crash sometime. Then a sense of emptiness after the crash which will call us to our senses. The specialist's view of the world logically narrows itself down to a race of non-entities for nothings. And even if a thing is a thing, it is a nothing to a non-entity. And if it is the one business of a specialist to obtain results, and we are all browbeaten into being specialists, but one result is going to be possible. It is obvious that the man who is willing to sacrifice the most is going to have the most success in the race, crowd out and humiliate or annihilate the others. If this is to be the world, it is only men who are ready to die for nothing in order to create nothing who will be able to secure enough of nothing to rule it. One wonders how long ruling such a world will be worthwhile, a world which has accepted as the order of the day success by suicide, the spending of manhood on things which only by being men we can enjoy, the method of forging boilers and getting deaf to buy violins, of having elevated railways for dead men, wireless telegraphs for clods, gigantic printing presses for men who have forgotten how to read. Let us all, by all means, make all things for the world. So we set ourselves to our task cheerfully, the task of attaining results for people at large by killing people in particular off. We are getting to be already, even in the arts, men with one sense. We have classes even in color. Schools of painters are founded by men because they have 1/7 of a sense of sight. Schools of musicians divide themselves off into fractions of the sense of sound, and on every hand men with 143 million cells in their brains become noted nobodies because they only use 143. What is the use of attaining results, one asks, of making such a perfectly finished world when there is not a man in it who would pay any attention to it as a world? If the planet were really being improved by us, if the stars shone better by our committing suicide to know their names, it might be worthwhile for us all to die, perhaps, to make racks of ourselves, frames for souls, one whole generation of us, in one single heroic concerted attempt to perfect a universe like this, the use and mastery of it. But what would it all come to? Would we not still be left in the way on it, we and our children, lumbering it up, soiling and disgracing it, making a machine of it? There would be no one to appreciate it. Our children would inherit the curse from us, would be more like us than we are. If anyone is to appreciate the world, we must appreciate it and pass the old secret on. No one seems to believe in appreciating more than one thing at least. The practical disappearance in any vital form of the lecture lyceum, the sermon, the essay, and the poem, the annihilation of the imagination or organ of comprehension, the disappearance of personality, the abolition of the editorial, the temporary decline of religion, of genius, of the artistic temperament, can all be summed up and symbolized in a single trait of modern life. It's separated men, interested in separate things. We are getting to be lovers of contentedly separate things, little things in their little places all by themselves. The modern reader is a skimmer, a stare at pictures like a child while he reads, never thinking a whole thought, a lover of peaks and paragraphs as a matter of course. Except in his money-making, or perhaps in the upper levels of science, the typical modern man is all paragraphs, not only in the way he reads, but in the way he lives and thinks. Outside of his specialty, he is not interested in anything more than one paragraph's worth. He is as helpless as a bit of protoplasm before the sight of a great many very different things being honestly put together. Putting things together tires him. He has no imagination because he has the daily habit of contentedly seeing a great many things which he never puts together. He is neither artistic, nor original, nor far-sighted, nor powerful, because he has a paragraph way of thinking, a scrap bag of a soul, because he cannot concentrate separate things, cannot put things together. He has no personality because he cannot put himself together. It is significant that in the days when personalities were common and when very powerful, interesting personalities could be looked up, several to the mile, on almost any road in the land, it was not uncommon to see a business letterhead like this: general merchandise, dry goods, notions, hats, shoes, groceries, hardware, coffins and caskets, livery and feed stable, physician and surgeon, justice of the peace, licensed to marry. If, as it looks just at present, the nation is going to believe in arbitration as the general modern method of adjustment, that is, in the all-siding up of a subject, the next thing it will be obliged to believe in will be some kind of an institution of learning which will produce arbitrators, men who have 2 or 3 perfectly good human sides to their mind, who have been allowed to keep minds with 3 dimensions. The probabilities are that if the mind of Socrates or any other great man could have an X-ray put on it and could be thrown on a canvas, it would come out as a hexagon or an almost circle, with lines very like spokes on the inside, bringing all things to a center. It is not necessary to deny, in the present emphasis of things, that we are making and inspiring all things except ourselves in a way that would make the things glad. The trouble is that things are getting too glad. They are turning around and making us. Nearly every man in college is being made over, mind and body, into a sort of machine. When the college has finished him and put him on the market, and one wonders what he is for, one learns he is to do some very little part of some very little thing, and nothing else. The local paper announces with pride that in the new factory we have for the manufacture of shoes, it takes 163 machines to make one shoe, 1 man to each machine. I ask myself, if it takes 163 machines to make 1 shoe, how many machines does it take to make 1 man? The infinite face of the street goes by me night and day. To and fro its innumerable eyes, always the sound of footsteps in my ears. Out of all these, jostling our shoulders, hidden from our souls, there waits an all-man, a great man, I know, as always great men wait, whose soul shall be the signal to the latent hero in us all, who, standing forth from the machines of learning and the machines of worship that spread their noise and network through all the living of our lives, shall start again the old sublime adventure of keeping a man upon the earth. He shall rouse the glowing crusaders, the darers of every land, who through the proud and dreary temples of the wise shall go with the cry from Nazareth on their lips, Woe unto you, ye men of learning! Ye have taken away the key of knowledge. Ye have entered not in yourselves, and them that were entering in ye have hindered. And the mighty message of the one great scholar of his day, who knew a God, whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, I am become as sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. I do not forget of him whose I, if I be lifted up, is the hail of this modern world, that there were men of letters in those far-off days when once he walked with us, who, sounding their brass and tinkling their cymbals, asked the essentially ignorant question of all outsiders of knowledge in every age, How knoweth this man letters, never having learned? As I lay on my bed in the night, they came, pale with sleep, the faces of all the living as though they were dead. What is power? They cried. Souls that were lost from their masters while they slept, trooping through my dream. What is power? Now these 1900 years since the boy in the temple with the doctors, still the wind of faces flying through the spaces of my dream. What is power? They cried. 7. Reading the world together. It is not necessary to decry science, but it should be decried on the housetops of education. The world around in this 20th century that science is in a rut of dealing solely with things, and that the pronoun of science is it. While it is obvious that neuter knowledge should have its place in any real scheme of life, it is also obvious that most of us, making locomotives, playing with mist, fire, and water, and lightning, and the great game with matter, should be allowed to have sex enough to be men and women a large part of the time, the privilege of being persons, perchance gods, surmounting this matter we know so much about, rather than becoming like it. The next great move of education, the one which is to be expected, is that the educated man of the 20th century is going to be educated by selecting out of all the bare knowledges the warm and human elements in them. He is going to work these over into a relation to himself, and when he has worked them over into relation to himself, he is going to work them over through himself into everyone else and read the world together. It is because the general habit of reading for persons, acquiring one's knowledge naturally and vitally in its relation to life, has been temporarily swept to one side in modern education, that we are obliged to face the divorced condition of the educated world today. There seem to be, for the most part, but two kinds of men living in it, living on opposite sides of the same truths, glaring at each other. On the one hand, the anemically spiritual, broad, big, pallid men, and on the other, the funny, infinitesimal, provincial, matter-cornered, matter-of-fact ones. However useless it may seem to be, there is but one way out. Some man is going to come to us, must come to us, who will have it in him to challenge these forces, do battle with them, fight with fog on one hand and desert on the other. There never will be one world in education until we have one man who can emphasize persons and things together, and do it every day, side by side, in his own mind. When there is one man who is an all-man, an epitome of a world, there shall be more all-men. He cannot help attracting them, drawing them out, creating them. With enough men who have a whole world in their hearts, we shall soon have a whole world. Whether it is true or not that the universe is most swiftly known, most naturally enjoyed as related to one creator or person, as the self-expression of one being, who loved all these things enough to gather them together, it is generally admitted that the natural man seems to have been created to enjoy a universe as related to himself. His most natural and powerful way of enjoying it is to enjoy it in its relation to persons. A person may not have created it, but it seems, for the time being at least, and so far as persons are concerned, to have been created for persons. To know the persons and the things together, and particularly the things in relation to the persons, is the swiftest and simplest way of knowing the things. Persons are the nervous system of all knowledge. So far as man is concerned, all truth is a subtopic under his own soul, and the universe is the tool of his own life. Reading for different topics in it gives a superficial knowledge of the men who write about them. Reading to know the men gives him a superficial knowledge, in the technical sense, of the things they write about. Let him stand up and take his choice like a man between being superficial in the letter and superficial in the spirit. Outside of his specialty, however, being superficial in the letter will lead him to the most knowledge. Man is the greatest topic. All other knowledge is a subtopic under a man, and the stars themselves are as footnotes to the thoughts of his heart. Things are not only related to other things, the soul of the man says, they are related to me. This relation of things to me is a mutual affair, partly theirs and partly mine, and I am going to do my knowing, act on my own knowledge as if I were of some importance in it. Shall I reckon with alkalis and acids and not reckon with myself? I say, O great nature, O infinite things, by the charter of my soul, and whether I have a soul or not, I am not only going to know things, but things shall know me. I stamp myself upon them. I shall receive from them and love them and belong to them, but they shall be my things, because they are things, and they shall be to me what I make them. The sun is thy plaything, my soul says to me. O mighty child, the stars thy companions. Stand up, come out into the day. Laugh the great winds to thy side. The sea, if thou wilt have it so, is thy frog pond, and thou shalt play with the lightnings in thy breast. Aye, I cry, I know it. The youth of the world seizes my whole being. I hurrah like a child through all knowledge. I have taken all heaven for my nursery. The world is my rocking horse. Things are not only for things, and my body in the end for things, but now I live, and things are for me. Aye, and they shall be to thee, said my soul, what thou biddest them. And now I go forth quietly. Do you not see, O mountains, that you must reckon with me? I am the younger brother of the stars. I have faced nations in my heart. Great bullying, hulking, half-dead centuries I have faced. I have made them speak to me, and have dared against them. If there is history, I also am history. If there are facts, I also am a fact. If there are laws, it is one of the laws that I am one of the laws. All knowledge, I have said in my heart, instead of being a kind of vast overseer and slave system for a man to lock himself up in and throw away his key, becomes free, fluent, daring, and glorious the moment it is conceived through persons and for persons and with persons. Knowledge is not knowledge until it is conceived in relation to persons, that is, in relation to all the facts. Persons are facts also, and on the whole, the main facts, the facts which for 70 years at least, or until the planet is too cooled off, all other facts are for. The world belongs to persons, is related to persons, and all the knowledge thereof, and by heaven, by my soul's delight, all the persons the knowledge is related to shall belong to me, and the knowledge that is related to them shall belong to me, the whole human round of it. The spirit and rhythm and song of their knowledge, the thing in it that is real to them, that sings out their lives to them, shall sing to me. End of section 18. Chapter 19 of The Lost Art of Reading by Gerald Stanley Lee. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 4, What to Do Next. I am he who tauntingly compels men, women, nations, crying, "Leap from your seats and contend for your lives." 1. See next chapter. It is good to rise early in the morning, when the world is still respectable and nobody has used it yet, and sit and look at it. Try to realize it. One sees things very differently. It is a kind of yawn of all being. One feels one's soul lying out, all relaxed on it and resting on real things. It stretches itself on the bare bones of the earth and knows. On 100 silent hills it lies and suns itself. And as I lay in the morning, soul and body reaching out to the real things and resting on them, I thought I heard one part of me, down underneath, half in the light and half in the dark, laughing softly at the other. "What is this book of yours?" it said coldly, "with its proffered scheme of education, its millenniums and things? What do you think this theory, this heaven-spanning theory of reading of yours really is, which you have held up objectively, almost authoritatively, to be looked at as truth? Do you think it is anything, after all, but a kind of pallid, unreal watercolor exhibition, a row of blurs of faintly colored portraits of yourself spread on space? Do you not see how unfair it is, this spinning out of one's own little dark, tired inside, a theory for a wide heaven and earth, this straddling with one temperament, a star?" Then I made myself sit down and compose what I feared would be a strictly honest title page for this book. Instead of "The Lost Art of Reading, a Study of Education by," etc., I wrote it, "How to Be More Like Me, a Shy at Education by," etc. And when I looked boldly, almost scientifically, at this title page, let it mock me a little, had laughed and sighed over it as I ought, there came a great hush from I know not where. I remembered it was the title, after all, for better or worse, in some sort or another, of every book I had craved and delighted in the whole world. Then suddenly I found myself before this book, praying to it, and before every struggling, desiring book of every man of other men, where it has prayed before, and I dared to look my title in the face. I have not denied, I do not need to deny, that what I have uncovered here is merely my own soul's glimmer, my interpretation, at this mighty passing show of a world, and it comes to you, O gentle reader, not as I am, but as I would like to be. Out of chaos it struggles to you, and defeat, can you not see it? And if but the benediction of what I or you or any man would like to be will come and rest on it, it is enough. Take it first and last, it is written in every man's soul, be his theory whatsoever it may, of this great wondering world, wave after wave of it, shuddering and glorying over him. It is in this world until he possesses it, or misses possessing it himself, feels it slipping from him. It is in what a man is, has, or might have, that he must track out his promise for a world. His life is his prayer for the ages as long as he lives, and what he is and what he is trying to be sings and prays for him, says masses for his soul under the stars and in the presence of all peoples when he is dead. By this truth I in my book with you, gentle reader, must stand or fall. Even now as I bend over the click of my typewriter, the years rise dim and flow over me out of the east. Generations of brothers, out of the mist of heaven and out of the dust of the earth, trooping across the world and wondering at it, come and go, and out of all these there shall not be one, no, not one, gentle reader, but shall be touched and loved by you, by me. In light out of shadow, or in the shadow out of the light, our souls fleck them with the invisible, blessing them and cursing them. We shall be the voices of the night and day to them, shall live a shadow of life with them, and be the sounds in their ears. Did any man think that what we are and what we are trying to be is ours, is private, is for ourselves? Boundlessly, helplessly scattered on the world, upon the faces of our fellows, our souls mock to us or sing to us forever. So if I have opened my windows to you, say not it is because I have dared. It is because I have not dared. I have said I will protect my soul with the street. I will have my vow written on my forehead. I will throw open my window to the passer-by, fling it in. I beg you, O world, whatever it is, be it prayer or hope or jest, it is mine. I have vowed to live with it, to live out of it, so long as I feel your footsteps under my casement and know that your watch is upon my days and that you hold me to myself. I have taken for my challenge or for my comrade, I know not which, a whole world. And what shall a man give in exchange for a whole world? And my soul said, he shall not save nor keep back himself. Who is the fool, that I should be always taking all this trouble for him, tiptoeing up and down the world with my little cover over my secret for him? To defy a fool, I have said, speak your whole truth. Then God locks him out. To hide a secret, have enough of it. Hide it outdoors. Why should a man take anything less than a world to hide in? If a soul is really a soul, why should it not fall back for its reserve on its own infinity? God does. Even daisies do. It is too big a world to be always bothering about one's secret in it. Who has time for it? I have said. Give it out. Move right on living. Get another. The only way for a man in this 20th century to hide his soul is by letting it reach out of sight. Not by locks, nor by stiflings, nor by mean little economizings of the heart does a man earn a world for a comrade. Let the laughers laugh on the great still street in space where souls are. Who cares? 2. Diagnosis. Compelled as I am, as most of us are, to witness the unhappy spectacle in every city of the land of a great mass of unfortunate and mutilated persons, whirled round and round in rows in huge reading machines, being crunched and educated, it is very hard not to rush thoughtlessly into the rescue sometimes, even if one has nothing better than such a pitiful, helpless thing as good advice. I am afraid it does not look very wise to do it. Civilization is such a vast, hypnotizing, polarizing spectacle, has the stage so fully to itself, everybody's eyes glued on it, it is hard to get up and say what one thinks in it. One cannot find anything equally objective to say it with. One feels as if calling attention to oneself to the little private shabby theater of one's own mind. It is as if in a great theater, on a back seat in it, one were to get up and stand in his chair and get the audience to turn round and say, ladies and gentlemen, that is not the stage with the footlights over there. This is the stage here where I am. Now watch me twirl my thumbs. But the great spectacle of the universal reading machine is too much for me. Before I know it, I try to get the audience to turn around. The spectacle of even a single lad in his more impressionable and possible years reading a book, whether he has anything to do with it or not, in spite of the author and in spite of himself, when one considers how many books he might read which really belong to him, is enough to make a mere reformer or outlaw or parent interferer of any man who is compelled to witness it. But it seems that the only way to interfere with one of these great reading machines is to stop the machine. One would say theoretically that it would not take very much to stop it. A mere broken thread of thought would do it, if the machine had any provision for thoughts. As it is, one can only stand outside, watch it through the window, and do what all outsiders are obliged to do: shout into the din a little good advice. If this good advice were to be summed up in a principle or prepared for a textbook, it would be something like this. The whole theory of our prevailing education is a kind of unanimous, colossal, I can't, you can't, chorus. We all of us together can't. The working principle of public school education, all the way from its biggest superintendents or overseers down to its littlest towheads in the primary rooms is a huge, overbearing, overwhelming system of not expecting anything of anybody. Everything is arranged throughout with reference to not expecting, and the more perfectly a system works without expecting or needing to expect, the more successful it is represented to be. The public does not expect anything of the politicians. The politicians do not expect anything of the superintendents. The superintendents do not expect anything of the teachers, and the teachers do not expect anything of the pupils, and the pupils do not expect anything of themselves. That is to say, the whole educational world is upside down, so perfectly and regularly and faultlessly upside down that it is almost hopeful. All one needs to do is to turn it accurately and carefully over at every point, and it will work wonderfully. To turn it upside down, have teachers that believe something. 3. Eclipse. When it was decreed in the course of the 19th century that the educational world should pass over from the emphasis of persons to the emphasis of things, it was decreed that a generation that could not emphasize persons in its knowledge could not know persons. A generation which knows things and does not know persons naturally believes in things more than it believes in persons. Even as an educator who is as forward-looking and open to human nature as President Charles F. Thwing, with all his emphasis of knowing persons and believing in persons as a basis for educational work, seems to some of us to give an essentially unbelieving and pessimistic classification of human nature for the use of teachers. Early education, says President Thwing, occupies itself with description, geometry, space, arithmetic, time, science, the world of nature. Later education, with comparison and relations. If one asks, why not both together? Why learn facts at one time and their relations at another? Is it not the most vital possible way to learn facts to learn them in their relations? The answer that would be generally made reveals that most teachers are pessimists, that they have very small faith in what can be expected of the youngest pupils. The theory is that interpretative minds must not be expected of them. Some of us find it very hard to believe as little as this in any child. Most children have such an incorrigible tendency for putting things together that they even put them together wrong rather than not put them together at all. Under existing educational conditions, a child is more of a philosopher at 6 than he is at 26. The third stage of education, for which Dr. Thwing partitions off the human mind, is the stage in which a pupil becomes capable of original research, a discoverer of facts and relations, himself. In theory, this means that when a man is 30 years old and all possible habits of originality have been trained out of him, he should be allowed to be original. In practice, it means removing a man's brain for 30 years and then telling him he can think. There never has been a live boy in a school as yet that would allow himself to be educated in this way if he could help it. All the daily habits of his mind resent it. It is a pessimistic, postponing way of educating him. It does not believe in him enough. It may be true of men in the bulk, men by the 5,000, that their intellectual processes happen along in this conveniently scientific fashion, at least as regards emphasis, but when it is applied to any individual mind at any particular time in actual education, it is found that it is not true, that it is pessimistic. God is not so monotonous and the universe is not graded as accurately as a public school, and things are much more delightfully mixed up. If a great university were to give itself wholeheartedly and pointedly to one single individual student, it would find it both convenient and pleasant and natural and necessary to let him follow these 3 stages all at once, in one stage with one set of things, and in another stage with another. Everyone admits that the first thing a genius does with such a convenient 3-part system or chart for a soul is to knock it endwise. He does it because he can. Others would if they could. He insists from his earliest days on doing all three parts, everything, one set of things after the other, description, comparison, creation, and original research, sometimes all at once. He learns even words all ways at once. All of these processes are applied to each thing, and a genius learns in his life, not the three parts of his life. One might as well say to a child, "Now, dear little lad, your life is going to be made up of eating, sleeping, and living. You must get your eating all done up now, these first 10 years, and then you can get your sleeping done up, and then you can take a spell at living, or putting things together." The first axiom of true pedagogics is that nothing can be taught except the outside or letter of a thing. The second axiom is that there is nothing gained in teaching a pupil the outside of a thing if he has not the inside, the spirit or relations of it. Teachers do not dare to believe this. They think it is true only of men of genius. They admit that men of genius can be educated through the inside, or by calling out the spirit, by drawing out their powers of originality from the first, but they argue that with common pupils this process should not be allowed. They are not worthy of it. That is to say, the more ordinary men are, and the more they need brains, the less they shall be allowed to have them. Inasmuch, then, as the inside cannot be taught, and there is no object in teaching the outside, the question remains how to get the right inside at work producing the right outside. This is a purely spiritual question, and brings us to the third axiom. Every human being born into the world is entitled to a special study and a special answer, all to himself. If, as President Thwing very truly says, "The higher education, as well as the lower, is to be organized by the unit of the individual student," what follows? The organization must be such as to make it possible for every teacher to study and serve each individual student as a special being by himself. In other words, if this last statement of Dr. Thwing's is to be acted on, it makes havoc with his first. It requires a somewhat new and practically revolutionary organization in education. It will be an organization which takes for its basic principle something like this, viz. The very essence of an average pupil is that he needs to be studied more, not less, than anyone else in order to find his master key, the master passion to open his soul with. The essence of a genius is that almost any one of a dozen passions can be made the motive power of his learning. His soul is opening somewhere all the time. The less individuality a student has, the more he is like other students. The more he should be kept away from other students until what little individuality he has been brought out. It is not only equally true of the ordinary man as well as of the man of genius that he must educate himself, but it is more true. Other people's knowledge can be poured into and poured over a genius innocently enough. It rolls off him like water on a duck's back. Even if it gets in, he organically protects himself. The genius of the ordinary man needs special protection made for it. As our educational institutions are arranged at present, the more commonplace our students are, the more we herd them together to make them more commonplace. That is, we do not believe in them enough. We believe that they are commonplace through and through, and that nothing can be done about it. We admit, after a little intellectual struggle, that a genius, who is bound to be an individual anyway, should be treated as one, but a common boy, whose individuality can only be brought out by his being very vigorously and constantly reminded of it and exercised in it, is dropped altogether as an individual, is put into a herd of other common boys, and his last remaining chance of being anybody is irrevocably cut off. We do not believe in him as an individual. He is a fraction of a roomful. He is a 67th or a 734th of something. Someone has said that the problem of education is getting to be, how can we give, in our huge learning machines, our exceptional students more of a chance? I state a greater problem. How can we give our common students a chance to be exceptional ones? The problem can only be solved by teachers who believe something, who believe that there is some common ground, some spiritual law of junction between the man of genius, the natural or free man, and the cramped, i.e., artificial, ordinary one. It would be hard to name any more important proposition for current education to act on than this, that the natural man in this world is the man of genius. The Church has had to learn that religion does not consist in being unnatural. The schools are next to learn that the man of genius is not unnatural. He is what nature intended every man to be at the point where his genius lies. The way out in education, the only believing, virile man's way out, would seem to be to begin with the man of genius as a principle and work out the application of the principle to more ordinary men of slowed-down genius. We are going to use the same methods, faster or slower, for both. A child's greater genius lies in his having a more lively sense of relation with more things than other children. Teachers are going to believe that if the right thing can be done about it, this sense of a live relation to knowledge can be uncovered in every human soul, that there is a certain sense in which every man is his own genius. By education, said Helvetius, you can make bears dance, but never create a man of genius. The first thing for a teacher who believes this to do is not to teach. 4. Apocalypse. There is a spirit in this book struggling down underneath it, which neither I nor any other man shall ever express. It needs a nation to express it, a nation fearless to know itself, a great, joyous, trustful, expectant nation. The centuries break away. I almost see it now lifting itself in its plains and hills and fields and cities, in its smoke and cloudland, as on some huge altar to supreme destiny, a nation freed before heaven by the mighty, daily, childlike joy of its own life. I see it as a nation full of personalities, full of self-contained, normally self-centered, self-delighted, self-poised men of genius, men who balance off with a world, men who are capable of being at will magnificently self-conscious or unconscious, self-possessed or self-forgetful, balanced men, comrades and equals of a world, neither its slaves nor its masters. I have said I will not have a faith that I have to get to with a trap door. I have said that inspiration is for everybody. I have had inspiration myself, and I will not clang down a door above my soul and believe that God has given to me or to anyone else what only a few can have. I do not want anything. I will not have anything that anyone cannot have. If there is one thing rather than another that inspiration is for, it is that when I have it, I know that any man can have it. It is necessary to my selfishness that he shall have it. If a great wonder of a world like this is given to a man, and he is told to live on it, and it is not furnished with men to live with men that go with it, what is it all for? If one could have one's choice in being damned, there would be no way that would be quite so quick and effective as having inspirations that were so little inspired as to make one suppose they were merely for oneself or for a few others. The only way to save one's soul or to keep a corner of God in it is to believe that he is a kind of God who has put inspiration in every man. All that has to be done with it is to get him to stop smothering it. Inspiration, instead of being an act of going to work in a minute, living a few hundred years at once, an act of making up and creating a new and wonderful soul for oneself, consists in the act of lifting off the lid from the one has. The mere fact that the man exists who has had both experiences, not having inspiration and having it, gives a basis for a knowledge of what inspiration is. A man who has never had anything except inspiration cannot tell us what it is, and a man who has never had it cannot tell us what it is. But a man who has had both of these experiences, which is the case with most of us, constitutes a cross-section of the subject, a symbol of hope for everyone. All who have had not inspirations and inspirations both know that the origin and control and habit of inspiration are all of such a character as to suggest that it is the common property of all men. All that is necessary is to have true educators or promoters, men who furnish the conditions in which the common property can be got at. The only difference between men of genius who know it, and other men of genius who don't know it, is that the men of genius who know it have discovered themselves, have such a headlong habit of self-joy in them, have tasted their self-joys so deeply that they are bound to get at them whether the conditions are favorable or not. The great fact about the ordinary man's genius, which the educational world has next to reckon with, is that there are not so many places to uncover it. The ordinary man at first, or until he gets the appetite started, is more particular about the conditions. It is because a man of genius is more thorough with the genius he has, more spiritual and willful with it than other men, that he grows great. A man's genius is always at bottom religious, at the point where it is genius, a worshiping toward something until he gets it, a supreme covetousness for God, for being a God. It is a faith in him, a sense of identity and sharing with what seems to be above and outside, a sense of his own latent infinity. I have said that all that real teaching is for is to say to a man in countless ways, a countless "you can." And I have said that all real learning is for is to say, "I can." When we have enough great "I cans," there will be a great society or nation, a glorious "we can" rising to heaven. This is the ideal that hovers over all real teaching and makes it deathless, fertile forever. If the world could be stopped short for 10 years in its dull, sullen round of not believing in itself, if it could be allowed to have all of it, all over, even for 3 days, the great solemn joy of letting itself go, it would not be caught falling back very soon, I think, into its stupor of cowardice. It would not be the same world for 300 years. All that it is going to require to get all people to feel that they are inspired is someone who is strong enough to lift a few people off of themselves, get the idea started. Every man is so busy nowadays keeping himself, as he thinks, properly smothered, that he has not the slightest idea of what is really inside him, or of what the thing that is really inside him would do with him if he would give it a chance. Any man who has had the experience of not having inspiration and the experience of having it both knows that it is the sense of striking down through, of having the lid of one's smaller consciousness lifted off. In the long run, his inspiration can be had or not, as he wills. He knows that it is the supreme reasonableness in him, the primeval, underlying naturalness in him rising to its rights. What he feels when he is inspired is that the larger laws, the laws above the other laws, have taken hold of him. He knows that the one law of inspiration is that a man shall have the freedom of himself. Most problems and worries are based on defective, uninvoked functions. Some organ, vision, taste, or feeling, or instinct is not allowed its vent, its chance to qualify. Something needs lifting away. The common experience of sleeping things off, or walking, or working them off, is the daily symbol of inspiration. More often than not, a worry or trouble is moved entirely out of one's path by the simplest possible device, an intelligent or instinctive change of conditions. The fundamental heresy of modern education is that it does not believe this, does not believe in making deliberate arrangements for the originality of the average man. It does not see that the extraordinary man is simply the ordinary man keyed up, writ large, or moving more rapidly. What the average man is now, the great men were once. When we begin to understand that a man of genius is not supernatural, that he is simply more natural than the rest of us, that all the things that are true for him are true for us, except that they are true more slowly, The educational world will be a new world. The very essence of the creative power of a man of genius over other men is that he believes in them more than they do. He writes, paints, or sings as if all other men were men of genius, and he keeps on doing it until they are. All modern human nature is annexed genius. The whole world is a great gallery of things that men of genius have seen until they make other men see them too, and prove that other men can see them. What one man sees with travail or by being born again, whole generations see at last without trying. And when they are born the first time, the great cosmic process is going on in the human spirit. Ages flow down from the stars upon it. No one man shall guess now or ever what a man is, what a man shall be. But it is to be noticed that when the world gets its greatest man, the one who guesses most, generations are born and die to know him, all with awe and gentleness in their hearts. One after the other, as they wheel up to the great sun to live, they call him the Son of God because he thought everybody was. The main difference between a great man and a little one is a matter of time. If the little man could keep his organs going, could keep on experiencing, acting, and reacting on things for 4,000 years, he would have no difficulty in being as great as some men are in their 70. All genius is inherited time and space. The imagination, which is the psychological substitute for time and space, is a fundamental element in all great power because, being able to reach results without pacing off the processes, it makes it possible for a man to crowd more experience in and be great in a shorter time. The idea of educating the little man in the same way as the great man from the inside or by drawing out his originality meets with many objections. It is objected that inasmuch as no little men could be made into great men in the time allotted, there would be no object in trying to do it, and no result to show for it in the world except row after row of spoiled little men drearily waiting to die. The answer to this is the simple assertion that if a quart cup is full, it is the utmost a quart cup can expect. A hogshead can do no more. So far as the man himself is concerned, if he has 5 sound, real senses in him, all of them acting and reacting on real things, if he is alive, in other words, sincere through and through, he is educated. The true education must always consist not in how much a man has, but in the way he feels about what he has. The kingdom of heaven is on the inside of his 5 senses. 5. Every man his own genius. I do not mean by the man of genius in this connection the great man of genius who takes hold of his ancestors to live, rakes centuries into his life, burns up the phosphorus of 10 generations in 50 years, and with giant masterpieces takes leave of the world at last, bringing his family to a full stop in a blaze of glory and a spindling child or so. I am merely contending for the principle that the extraordinary or inspired man is the normal man at the point where he is inspired, and that the ordinary or uninspired boy can be made like him, must be educated like him, led out through his self-delight to truth. That, if anything, the ordinary or uninspired boy needs to be educated like a genius more than a genius does. I know of a country house which reminds me of the kind of mind I would like to have. In the first place, it is a house that grew. It could not possibly have been thought of all at once. In the second place, it grew itself, half inspiration and half common sense, with its mistakes and its delights all in it. Gloriously, frankly, it blundered into being. 7 generations tumbled on its floors, filled it with laughter and love and tears. One felt that every life that had come to it had written itself on its walls, that the old house had broken out in a new place for it, full of new little joys everywhere, and jogs and bays and afterthoughts and forethoughts, old roofs and young ones chumming together, and old chimneys, 3 to start with, and 4 new ones that came when they got ready. Everything about it touched the heart and said something. I have never managed to see it yet whether in sunlight, cloudlight, or starlight, or the light of its own lamps, but that it stood and spoke. It is a house that has genius. The genius of the earth and the sky around it are all in it, of motherhood, of old age, and of little children. It grew out of a spirit, a loving, eager putting together, a making of relations between things that were apart, the portrait of a family. It is a very beautiful, eloquent house, and hundreds of nights on the white road have I passed it by in my lonely walk, and stopped and listened to it, standing there in the lights, like a kind of low singing in the trees. And when I have come home later on the white road and the lights were all put out, I still feel it speaking there, faint against heaven, with all its sleep, its young and old sleep, its memories and hopes of birth and death, lifting itself in the night, a prayer of generations. Many people do not care for it very much. They would wonder that I should like a mind like it. It is a wandering around kind of a house, has 30 outside doors. If one doesn't like it, it is easy to get out, which is just what I like in a mind. Stairways almost anywhere. Only 1 or 2 places in the whole building where there is not a piazza, and every inch of piazza has steps down to the grass, and there are no walks. A great central fireplace, big as a room, little groups of rooms that keep coming on one like surprises, and little groups of houses around outside that have sprung up out of the ground themselves. A flower garden that thought of itself and looks as if it took care of itself, but doesn't. Everything exuberant and hospitable and free on every side and full of play. A high stillness and seriousness over all. I cannot quite say what it is, but most country houses look to me as if they had forgotten they were really outdoors, in a great wide, free, happy place, where winds and suns run things, where not even God says nay, and everything lives by its inner law in the presence of the others, exults in its own joy, and plays with God. Most country homes forget this. They look like little isles of glare and showing off and human joylessness, dotting the earth. People's minds in the houses are like the houses. They reek with propriety. That is, they are all abnormal, foreign to the spirit, to the passion of self-delight, of life, of genius. Most of them are fairly hostile to genius, or look at it with a lorgnette. I like to think that if the principles and habits of freedom that result in genius were to be gauged and adjusted toward bringing out the genius in ordinary men, they would result in the following. Recipe to make a great man, or a live small one. Let him be made like a great work of art. In general, follow the rule in Genesis 1. 1. Chaos. 2. Enough chaos, that is, enough kinds of chaos, pouring all the several parts of chaos upon the other parts of chaos. 3. Watch to see what emerges and what it is in the chaos that most belongs to all the rest. What is the unifying principle? 4. Fertilize the chaos. Let it be impregnated with desire, will, purpose, personality. 5. When the unifying principle is discovered, refrain from trying to force everything to attach itself to it. Let things attach themselves in their way, as they are sure to do in due time, and grow upon it. Let the mind be trusted. Let it not be always ordered around, thrust into, or meddled with. The making of a man, like the making of a work of art, consists in giving the nature of things a chance, keeping them open to the sun and air and the springs of thought. The first person who ever said to man, "You press the button and I will do the rest," was God. The emphasis of art in our modern education, of the knack or science or how of things, is to be followed next by the emphasis of the art that conceals art, genius, the norm and climax of human ability. Any finishing school girl can out-sonnet Keats. The study of appearances, the passion for the outside, has run its course. The next thing in education is going to be honesty, fearless naturalness, upheaval, the freedom of self, self-expectancy, all expectancy, and the passion for possessing real things. The personalities, persons with genius, persons with free-working, uncramped minds, are all there ready and waiting, both in teachers and pupils, all growing sub rosa. And the main thing that is left to do is to lift the great roof of machinery off and let them come up. The days are already upon us when education shall be taken out of the hands of the anemic, abstracted men who go into everything theory and first. There is already a new atmosphere in the educated world. The thing that shall be taught shall be the love of swinging out, of swinging up to the light and the air. Let every man live, the world says next, a little less with his outside, with his mere brain or logic stitching machine. Let him swear by his instincts more, and live with his medulla oblongata. 6. An inclined plane. This is the very pleasant and profitable ideal you have printed in this book, but teachers and pupils and institutions being what they are, it is not practical and nothing can be done about it. It is objected, respectfully submitted. 1. There is nothing so practical as an ideal. For if through his personality and imagination a man can be made to see an ideal, the ideal does itself. That is, it takes hold of him and inspires him to do it and to find means for doing it. This is what has been aimed at in this book. 2. The first and most practical thing to do with an ideal is to believe it. 3. The next most practical thing is to act as if one believed it. This makes other people believe it. To act as if one believed an ideal is to be literal with it, to assume that it can be made real, that something, some next thing can be done with it. 4. It is only people who believe an ideal who can make it practical. Educators who think that an ideal is true and who do not think it is practical do not think it is true, do not really know it. The process of knowing an ideal, of realizing it with the mind, is the process of knowing that it can be made real. This is what makes it an ideal, that it is capable of becoming real. And if a man does not realize an ideal, cannot make it real in his mind, it is not accurate for him to say that it is not practical. It is accurate for him to say that it is not practical to him. The ideal presented in this book is not presented as practical except to teachers who believe it. 5. Every man who has been given in this world, if he is allowed to get at them, 2 powers to make a man out of. These powers are vision and action. 1, seeing, and 2, being or doing what one sees. What a man sees with is quite generally called his imagination. What he does with what he sees is called his character or personality. If it is true, as has been maintained in the whole trend of this book, that the most important means of education are imagination and personality, the power of seeing things and the power of living as if one saw them, imagination and personality, must be accepted as the forces to teach with, and the things that must be taught. The persons who have imagination and personality in modern life must do the teaching. 6. Parents and others who believe in imagination and personality as the supreme energies of human knowledge and the means of education, and who have children they wish taught in this way, are going to make connections with such teachers and call on them to do it. 7. Inasmuch as the best way to make an ideal that rests on persons practical is to find the persons, the next thing for persons who believe in an ideal to do is to find each other out. All persons, particularly teachers and parents, in their various communities and in the nation, who believe that an ideal is practical in education should be social with their ideal, group themselves together, make themselves known and felt. 8. Some of us are going to act through the schools we have. We are going to make room in our present overmanaged, morbidly organized institutions with ordered-around teachers for teachers who cannot be ordered around, who are accustomed to use their imaginations and personalities to teach with instead of superintendents. We are going to have superintendents who will desire such teachers, The reason that our over-organized and over-superintended schools and colleges cannot get the teachers they want to carry out their ideals is a natural one enough. The moment ideal teachers are secured, it is found that they have ideals of their own and that they will not teach without them. When vital and free teachers are attracted to the schools and allowed fair conditions there, they will soon crowd others out. The moment we arrange to give good teachers a chance, good teachers will be had. 9. Others will find it best to act in another way. Instead of reforming schools from the inside, they are going to attack the problem from the outside, start new schools, which shall stand for live principles and outlive the others. As good teachers can arrange better conditions for themselves to teach in their own schools, wherever practicable, this would seem to be the better way. They are going to organize colleges of their own. They are going to organize unorganized colleges, for such they would be called at first, assemblings of inspired teachers, men grouping men about them, each after his kind. Everyone can begin somewhere. Teachers who are outside can begin outside, and teachers who are within can begin within. Certainly, if every teacher who believes something will believe deeply, will free himself, let himself out with his belief, act on it, the day is not long hence when the great host of ordered-around teachers with their ordered-around pupils will be a memory. Copying and appearing to know will cease. Self-delight and genius will again be the habit of the minds of men, and the days of our present poor, pale, fuddling, unbelieving, Simon Says thumbs up education will be numbered. Sometimes it seems as if this globe, this huge cyclorama of nations whirling in sunlight through stars, were a mere empty, mumbled repetition, a going round and round of the same stupendous stupidities and the same heroisms in human life. One is always feeling as if everything, arts, architecture, cables, colleges, nations, had all almost literally happened before, and the ages dark to us, gone the same round of beginning, struggling, and ending. Then the globe was wiped clean and began again. One of the great advantages in emphasizing individuals, the main idea of this book, in picking out particular men as forces, centers of energy in society, as the basis for one's program for human nature, is the sense it gives that things really can begin again, begin anywhere where a man is. One single human being, deeply believed in, glows up a world, casts a kind of speculative value, a divine wager over all the rest. I confess that most men I have seen seem to me phantasmagorically walking the earth, their lives haunting them, hanging intangibly about them, indefinitely postponed. But one does not need, in order to have a true, joyous working theory of life, to believe verbatim every moment in the mass of men as men. One needs to believe in them very much as possible men, larvae of great men, and if, in the meantime, one can have what is quite practicable, one sample of a square mile of what the mass of men in that mile might be, or are going to be, one comes to a considerable degree of enthusiasm, a working and sharing enthusiasm for all the rest. 7. Allons. I thought when I began to make my little visit in civilization, this book, that perhaps I ought to have a motto to visit a civilization with. So the motto I selected, a good one for all reformers, viewers of institutions and things, was, "Do not shoot the organist. He is doing the best he can." I fear I have not lived up to it. I am an optimist. I cannot believe he is doing the best he can. Before I know it, I get to hoping and scolding. I do not even believe he is enjoying it. Most of the people in civilization are not enjoying it. They are like people one sees on tally-hos. They are not really enjoying what they are doing. They enjoy thinking that other people think they are enjoying it. The great characteristic enthusiasm of modern society, of civilization, the fad of showing off, of exhibiting a life instead of living it, very largely comes, it is not too much to say, from the lack of normal egoism, of self-joy in civilized human beings. It has come over us like a kind of moral anemia. People cannot get interested enough in anything to be interested in it by themselves. Hence no great art, merely the art which is a trick or knack of appearance. We lack great art because we do not believe in great living. The emphasis which would seem to be most to the point in civilization is that people must enjoy something of their very own, even if it is only their sins. If they can do no better, and they are their own, it would be a beginning. They could work out from that. They would get the idea. Someone has said that people repent of their sins because they didn't enjoy them as much as they expected to. Well then, let them enjoy their repentance. The great point is, in this world, that men must get hold of reality somewhere, somehow, get the bare feel of living before they try dying. Most of us seem to think we ought to do them both up together. It is to be admitted that people might not do really better things for their own joy than for other people's, but they would do them better. It is not the object of this book to reform people. Reformers are sinners enjoying their own sins who try to keep other people from enjoying theirs. The object of this book is to inspire people to enjoy anything, to find a principle that underlies right and wrong both. Let people enjoy their sins, we say, if they really know how to enjoy. The more they get the idea of enjoying anything, the more vitally and sincerely they will run their course, turn around and enjoy something truer and more lasting. What we all feel, what every man feels, is that he has a personal need of daring and happy people around him, people that are selfish enough to be alive and worthwhile, people that have the habit and conviction of joy, whose joys, whether they are wrong or right, are real joys to them, not shadows or shows of joys that melt away when no one is looking. The main difficulty is the present juncture of the world in writing on the lost art of reading is that all the other arts are lost, the great self-delights. As they have all been lost together, it has been necessary to go after them together, to seek some way of securing conditions for the artist, the enjoyer and prophet of human life in our modern time. At the bottom of all great art, it is necessary to believe. There has been great believing, free, beautiful living. This is not to say that inconsistency, contradiction, and insincerity have not played their part, but it is the benediction, the great amen of the world to say this, that if there has been great constructive work, there has been great, radiant, unconquerable, constructive living behind it. There is but one way to recover the lost art of reading. It is to recover the lost art of living. This is not saying that inconsistency, contradiction, and insincerity have not played their part, but it is the benediction, the great amen of the world to say this, that if there has been great constructive work, there has been great, radiant, unconquerable, constructive living behind it. There's but one way to recover the lost art of reading. It is to recover the lost art of living. The day we begin to take the liberty of living our own lives, there will be artists and seers everywhere. We will all be artists and seers, and great arts and great books and great readers of books will flock to us. Well, here we are, gentle reader. We are rounding the corner of the last paragraph. Time stretches out before us. On the great high road, we stand together in the dawn, I with my little book in hand, you, perhaps, with yours. The white road reaches away before us, behind us. There are crossroads. There are parallels, too. Sometimes when there falls a clearness on the air, they are nearer than I thought. I hear crowds trudging on them in the dark, singing faintly. I hear them cheering in the dark. But this is my way right here. See the hill there? That is my next one. The sun in a minute. You are going my way, comrade? You are not going my way? So be it. God be with you. Top of the morning to you. I pass on. End of section 19. End of The Lost Art of Reading by Gerald Stanley Lee. Read by Joseph Tabler.